Week 3 bu631 readings, Project Management for Business Professionals. In this unit, we will be examining the best practices involved in starting and managing ongoing projects. We will examine how to successfully structure and administer projects, including setting goals and outcomes, developing frameworks, and managing changes. In this topic area, we will examine the initiation stage in the project management life cycle. We will evaluate how to successfully structure and start projects and learn how appropriate planning in the early stages yields better overall outcomes. Setting a meeting is being held in a conference room at a local hotel. All managers as well as key employees of R&S Amusement Services, as well as Jeff Dunbar and Kevin Pullen, are in attendance. This is the kickoff meeting for the project to modernize R&S's computer applications and systems. Reed Lewis, who is the president of R&S Amusement Services and the project's executive sponsor, is currently at the podium. Let's join the meeting currently in progress. RED, I want to thank you all for taking the time from your busy schedules to be here today. As most of you are aware, I have decided to embark on a project to bring our computer systems and operations into the 21st century. Applause from everyone, or at least equal to or better than those of our competition. For this project to be successful, it is imperative that it receive the utmost support from each one of you, starting with today's meeting. Diana has distributed copies of today's agenda, which is now displayed on the overhead projector. As you can see, after the opening remarks, we will have introductions. Let me start by introducing Jeff Dunbar and Kevin Pullen. Jeff and Kevin stand up of Premier Project Management Services. Jeff and Kevin are certified project managers who have a wealth of experience implementing information technology business systems. We are extremely fortunate to have these talented individuals lead and guide our efforts for the development of our new systems. I expect each of you to give Jeff and Kevin total cooperation in the event that they call on your services. Reed nods to Jeff and Kevin to sit down. I'm sure most of you know each other, but let's still go around the room and have everyone stand up and give their name, location, and what role they serve in the company. Introductions proceed around the room. Our EID now that everyone knows each other. Let's move on to the next order of business. Jeff, Kevin, and I have been meeting over the past few months and reviewing our current business processes and assessing our needs for automating those processes. In summary, we have identified 9 areas that are in desperate need of attention. They are: he motions to Diana to display the next slide: customer management, contracts, league management, asset tracking, inventory control, parts and supplies, collection management, revenue tracking, service and repair management, sales and marketing, internal operations, finance, shipping, receiving, etc. Human resources, payroll and benefits. I'm sure that each one of you has strong feelings and opinions about one or more of these areas, and we will solicit those thoughts in due time. For now, though, we have identified 3 areas or projects that will receive top priority. We will concentrate our IT efforts on those projects initially, and when those have concluded, we will concentrate on the other areas. The 3 projects that we will work on first are customer management, asset management, and collection management. Before a project manager begins working on a project, he or she needs to understand how and why the organization decided to spend valuable resources, money, and time on the project. Chapter 2 describes this process as using the systems approach. It is important for a project manager to understand the reasons a project was selected so that the critical success factors, the tasks that, once completed to the user's satisfaction, mean the project is done and successful, for the project are clearly defined and understood. You will understand the project management initiation process when you can. Define the project initiation process group. With all its component processes and deliverables, understand why selecting the right projects to work on is important and sometimes difficult for an organization. Learn the tools and techniques of project selection, including The strategic planning process for the organization and IT department quantitative methods, including the following: return on investment, ROI, net, present value and PEV, internal rate of return, IRR, payback analysis, qualitative methods, balance scorecard, real options, the weighted scoring model, WSEM. Understand the importance and contents of a project charter and the stakeholder assessment matrix. Understand how to conduct a project kickoff meeting and introduction to project selection and initiation. Chapter 1 defines project, and Chapter 2 describes the concept of a project lifecycle. With these two concepts understood, we will now move on and discuss in this chapter how projects should be selected to be executed. Before launching the start of a project managers need to take a step back and figure out what projects the organization should be working on. Many projects in the past have been selected because of the squeaky wheel syndrome. The person who makes the most noise repeatedly gets his or her project selected. Hopefully, you can see that this is not the best method to selecting projects. An organization needs to go through a formal process of selecting the right mix of projects before it formalizes the list into a project charter and begins work. In most, if not all, organizations, there are more projects than there are funds and people to run them. Organizations, therefore, need to be very selective in choosing the projects that will return the most value to the organization. Value in this sense relates not only to dollars, profit, but factors such as market share, customer relations, safety issues, environmental concerns, and new government regulations. Why this project? Who selected it? And what else is going on in the organization at the same time? Are all questions that need to be asked and answered before work on the project begins. One only needs to look at the dismal success rates of IT projects presented in Chapter 1 to see why it's important that organizations begin by choosing the right projects to work on. In the past, IT professionals have done a poor job of understanding and presenting the value of IT projects. The reasons for the poor performance are twofold. First, IT professionals spend more time studying technology than finance, and second, they are unable to effectively communicate to management that IT projects are different than projects in other industries and thus require different metrics. IT professionals, especially managers, business analysts, and project managers, must understand the broader picture of the organization and the impact a technology project will have on it from cost and other perspectives. They need to understand and possess the ability to communicate the value of IT projects in terms the rest of the organization can understand. In the sections of this chapter that follow, many techniques are described that will aid a project manager and their team in communicating the value of IT projects. Many of the newer techniques, such as balance, scorecard, and real options, have begun to address this issue of finding better ways to define the merits of an IT project. In today's business climate of tight budgets, limited IT resources, and low IT project success rates, organizations are becoming more and more selective in the IT projects they approve. But most organizations have realized the strategic importance of IT to their success. IT departments are experiencing tremendous changes as their roles expand to impact customer service, sales, and even business strategies. As a result, organizations are increasingly turning IT into a driving force in all aspects of business. Newman, 2016, to get projects approved, IT managers must learn to align their projects with the company's strategic direction. To accomplish this, project managers need to ask themselves some key questions about a project so they can understand what value it lends to the organization, the risks associated with the project, and the value of the project to the organization if it is successful. Andriel, 2001, has identified 4 key issues that must be considered to understand the bigger organizational picture in which IT projects play a role: business value. IT project managers must look at a project from a business perspective by identifying what business processes will be most affected. They must understand the process thoroughly and the impact the project will have on these processes. They must also understand what impact the project will have on associated processes. Using the systems approach assists in learning what impact a project will have on all parts of the organization. Technology. The technology used for a project needs to be well-tested, scalable, secure, modifiable, and usable. Has the technology been used in the organization before, and do we have experience with it? What technology is the competition using, and how might technology allow this organization to see what works and doesn't work in their specific industry? Cost/benefit questions. An organization needs to understand whether the complete costs, including acquisition, development, and ongoing support costs of the project outweigh its benefits. Risk. IT project managers must do a thorough risk assessment for the project. They must know what kinds of issues or problems might surface during the project, such as the software vendor going out of business in the middle of the project or funding for the project being cut in half during execution. And be sure to have appropriate safeguards or workarounds in place so the project can still be completed. All this information needs to be presented in the project's business case. The next section of this chapter demonstrates how to gather and use this information to build the project's business case. Business case. The contents of the business case may change depending on the size, cost, level of risk, or strategic importance of the project. The levels of each of these factors and others will determine the amount of time and information required for the business case. For example, if you need to build a business case for a small feature to be added to the company website that was projected to cost $5,000 and take only 2 weeks to complete using one person, the business case would be short and probably not very detailed. But if you were asked to build a business case for a project that had early estimates of over $500,000 and 20 people and would take the next 6 months, your business case would need to be much more detailed and complete. Key parts of the business case may include the following: key objectives, methods, and sources used to obtain information for the business case, benefits to the organization if the project is successful, consequences if the project is not done, full life cycle costs, qualitative models, quantitative models, risks. All of these parts are defined in later sections of this chapter. Input is needed from a variety of people to build the business case. The business case should not be developed by one person in a vacuum. The team responsible for putting together the business case should be representative of all affected stakeholders. IT professionals should also participate, business analysts, architects, etc., on the team to aid in information gathering. The benefits of building such a team for the business case development process are many. Credibility. Credibility is achieved because the information comes from many different sources, allowing for checks and balances. Accuracy. Accuracy is improved for the same reasons as credibility, as well as the fact that the information comes from the people who are best equipped to provide it. For example, to get salary data for key resources needed for the project, you go to the Human Resources Department, which can provide the basic salary data plus overhead rates, insurance, vacation, and so on. Or to get market impact, you solicit input from the marketing and sales department. Thoroughness. Thoroughness is aided by this approach if all team members are allowed input into the process. Ownership. It's important that IT projects not be viewed as solely the property of the IT department. All stakeholders from all affected departments need to feel like part of the process and take some ownership in making sure the project is successful. The main purpose of the business case is to aid decision makers in selecting the best projects possible for the benefit of the organization. The business case must demonstrate how an IT project will add value to the organization. Project management concepts. Project selection and initiation. This section introduces the tools and techniques of building each part of the business case, mentioned in the previous section, as well as the 2 key deliverables from the initiation process: the project charter and the stakeholder assessment matrix, referred to as Stakeholder Register in the 5th edition of the PMBOK. Strategic planning, one of the key considerations for making project selection choices, is the answer to the question, does the proposed project aid the organization in the fulfillment of its strategic plan? Organizations use many strategies to execute the strategic plan. This text concentrates on technology as an enabler of an organization's success. In today's organization, IT has become the key piece to success. You would have to look really hard to find a project an organization is executing today that doesn't involve IT in some way. Most of the objectives in an organization's strategic plan include an IT strategy. The main goal of any project should be to deliver some form of business value, higher market share, new product or market, better customer support, higher productivity, lower operating costs, and so on. All these are typically defined in the company's strategic plan as goals and objectives. Listed next to each goal or objective is a list of strategies that will fulfill the objective. The development of strategies, projects, must focus on what is needed to meet the strategic plan's goals and objectives. This development involves an analysis of the external environment to identify economic, social, and technological opportunities and potential threats. It also involves a SWOT analysis of the internal environment. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. An organization needs to understand the external opportunities and threats that exist and their internal strengths and weaknesses to face them. Each of these categories is defined as follows. Strength. A strength is an organizational resource, money, people, location, equipment, IT, that can be used to meet an objective. Weakness. A weakness is a missing or limited resource that bears on the organization's ability to meet an objective. Opportunity. An opportunity is a circumstance that may provide the organization a chance to improve its ability to compete. Threat. A threat is a potentially negative circumstance that, if it occurs, may hinder an organization's ability to compete. The deliverable from all identified analysis is a set of strategies, projects, designed to best meet the needs of all stakeholders. Because today's organizations face an ever-growing number of opportunities and threats, they must be able to successfully execute multiple projects in multiple departments. A technique that assists organizations in managing multiple projects is called portfolio management. IT project portfolio management organizes a group of IT projects into a single portfolio consisting of reports that capture project goals, costs, timelines, accomplishments, resources, risks, and other critical factors. Chief Information Officers, CIOs, and other IT managers can then regularly review entire portfolios, allocate resources as needed, and adjust projects to produce the highest returns. With IT project portfolio management, you group projects so they can be managed as a portfolio, much as an investor would manage stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Benefits of this approach include the capability to identify redundancies, allocate resources across all projects appropriately, and monitor project progress. An additional benefit that's highly regarded by CIOs is the capability to view projects as investments, thus analyzing not only how much a project will cost, but also its anticipated risks and returns in relation to other projects. This allows entire portfolios to be managed to produce the highest returns. Project portfolio management is covered in more depth in Chapter 14. Many studies have been conducted to research the most used and most appropriate project selection methods in various industry segments. Bacon, 1992, Cabral Cardoso and Payne, 1996, Jiang and Klein, 1999, Sauter, 1983. All the tools discussed in this chapter were rated highly by most of the studies, depending on project characteristics, strategic value, risk, size, both in time and cost, and industry. The bottom line is that organizations need to follow a formal, structured, repeatable process to ensure that they are working on the best mix of projects to match their current economic and strategic situation. Also, the importance and size of the project should drive the amount of time and money used in building the business case. For example, an inexpensive 1-week project should not take 3 weeks to justify, and a 1-year, 20-person, high-value and high-cost project should not take 10 minutes to justify. Project selection models. A project selection model is a simplified representation of project characteristics. Evaluating something that hasn't happened yet can be a very difficult and complex task. Models allow you to emphasize key parts of the puzzle and see them more clearly. When you look at just one project at a time, the complexity issues are small, but organizations must continually evaluate many projects that consist of different costs, schedules, risks, importance, and so on. But remember that these models are partial representations of reality, and final decisions need to be made by informed decision makers. There are 2 basic types of project selection models, qualitative and quantitative. The next 2 sections walk through the process of adding qualitative and quantitative models to the business case. Then, later in this chapter, information from the case study is used to build the business case and demonstrate how the top 3 projects were selected for the R&S Amusements Services case study. Qualitative models. The following are some examples of qualitative models: subject matter expert, SME, judgments, sacred cow. Decisions mandates. SMEs are individuals either within a company or outside the company who possess expertise or unique knowledge in a particular facet of the business, either because of work experience, education, or a combination of the 2. SMEs can evaluate projects with or without more complex quantitative models and can categorize projects with low, medium, and high priority rankings. Some use colors to code projects, with high priority getting green, medium getting yellow, and low getting red. High priority projects tend to be scheduled and initiated before medium and low priority projects. Sacred cow decisions are made because someone, generally in upper management, really wants a particular project to be done. These decisions are not always in the best interest of the organization, but of one individual or a group. Unfortunately, many organizations still operate today using this method. The scenario usually goes something like this. A senior manager from a non-IT department picks up a trade magazine and reads about how all the best companies are doing XYZ to be competitive. He then schedules a meeting with an IT manager and explains that XYZ is something we must implement. The IT manager, not knowing any better, launches a project, gathers resources, and begins to operate under the directive to get it done ASAP, as soon as possible. Other projects that these individuals are working on are all delayed, as they work on the sacred one. Now, it may be that this is a worthwhile project, but maybe some other worthwhile projects were dropped. Companies need to make sure they follow a systems approach and evaluate any new projects against other potential projects and currently running projects. The third qualitative method is mandates. Mandates can come from vendors, government agencies, industry sectors, or markets. Vendors may, in the case of computer software, release a new version and stop support for previous versions. You either upgrade or risk losing support. Some vendor contracts stipulate that you will keep the software current. A project may be mandated by key customers. Many consumer goods retailers are mandating that all suppliers be capable of conducting business, including orders, shipping information, and inventory control, completely electronically. If your company doesn't have this capability but wants to do business with the customer, you will be required to add these capabilities. Other mandates may come from a government agency or legislative body that passes a new law. For example, the Family and Medical Leave Act allows individuals to take a leave of absence from work to care for a family member. The employee is guaranteed a position with the company upon returning to work, maybe not the same position, but a job. Companies were forced to update their human resources software and systems to track and manage this type of event. The industry segment or market pressures may force companies to make changes to remain competitive. For example, if a primary competitor offers a new service or product that is well received by customers, you may be forced to follow suit or risk losing market share. Some examples include U.S. banks offering automatic teller machines, ATMs, with access to cash withdrawals and deposits, and major brick-and-mortar retailers, such as Sears and Walmart, needing to create online services, including product catalog searches and purchasing. Quantitative models. Every IT project will have some level of financial benefit to the organization as well as some level of cost. The bottom line is that IT projects cost money. The reason we create financial models for project selection analysis is simply to ascertain whether the benefits outweigh the costs and to what degree. Each organization uses different combinations of these models. No organization uses every one of them during each selection process. Some determine the mix of models to use based on the type and significance of the project. High risk, high dollar projects get more scrutiny than low risk, low dollar projects. Before examining each of the quantitative models, it's important that you understand that the numbers generated are estimates of future occurrences. Just because they look finite and complete doesn't mean that they're the whole story. These numbers are just one of the project characteristics you need to look at when deciding the merits of a new project. One item of business you need to understand before looking at the financial models is the idea of the time value of money, which affects the quantitative models. Projects of any size occur over long periods of time. Many span multiple years. Consequently, any evaluation of benefits and cost must be done over several time periods. A typical IT project will have costs from day one, but may not see any real benefits until much later. The key issue with quantitative models in this regard is that money has a time value. A dollar earned today has more buying power than a dollar earned later due to many factors, such as inflation and risk. If you give someone $1 today, she can invest it in a savings account and increase the value of the dollar, making it worth more than the dollar she receives a month from now. Organizations must operate in the same fashion. Organizations can invest the money they have today in a bank account or in other projects to increase its value. Before you invest money in a project, you must compare its rate of return against other opportunities, other projects. The following formula and example will help you understand the time value of money. Where FV equals future value of an investment project, PV equals present value of that same investment, I equals interest rate or discount rate or cost of capital, N equals number of years. The following simple example shows how this formula works. An organization invests $1,000 today, PV, for 1 year, N, at an interest rate of 10%, I, which means the investment is worth $1, 000, 1 plus 0.1, or $1,100 at the end of the first year. The problem arises when you have multiple investments with varying rates of returns. One investment might start making money in 1 year and another in 5 years. You need to find a way to evaluate different investments equally. You do this by evaluating the present value of each of the investments. This is called discounting future values to the present, or discounted cash flows. The formula above becomes, the following example demonstrates the value of a promise of $1,000 in benefits 1 year from today. The results show that the promise of $1,000 a year from today is worth only $909 today due to risk, inflation, and other factors. Understanding the concept of the time value of money is necessary before tackling the quantitative project selection models in the next section. All of the following quantitative models can be calculated using a spreadsheet program such as Microsoft Excel or just a handheld calculator. The following sections explain the 4 quantitative models: net present value, NPV, internal rate of return, IRR, return on investment, ROI, and payback period. Later in the chapter, these formulas are used in the R&S Amusement Services case study to demonstrate how you can use these formulas during the project selection process. Calculating the expected net monetary gain or loss from an investment project by discounting all future costs and benefits to the present time. If the NPV turns out to be a positive value, the project has surpassed the cost of capital or return available by investing the same money in other ways. All other project characteristics being equal, the project with the highest NPV should be chosen. To calculate NPV, you first determine the total costs of the project each year and the total benefits each year over a set number of years. Many organizations dictate the evaluation period you must use for your calculations, such as 3 or 5 years. Sometimes, this period might depend on the length of the project. The person or team responsible for determining the costs and benefits must do a thorough job of examining all known values to make the NPV calculation meaningful. Finding these benefits and costs is covered in greater detail in Chapter 6. The second step in the process is to determine the interest or discount rate. This number is based on the cost of obtaining capital to fund the project or the amount of return an organization can get from other investment opportunities with similar risks. Next, you calculate the NPV using the following formula, where T equals year of the cash flow N equals last year of the cash flow CF equals cash flow at time T I equals interest rate or discount rate. Next is an example that illustrates how to calculate NPV. There are 2 projects you might choose. The costs or cash outflows and the benefits or cash inflows are listed below for 5 years. Year 0 numbers are the initial costs and benefits. In many, but not all IT projects, the year 0 values for benefits are 0. Setting the discount rate to 8%, an example of how to calculate NPV for this example is located in the chart at the top of the following page. When you look at the NPV for both projects, you see that Project 1 has the higher value, making it more attractive. Both projects have a positive NPV, so both could be done if enough resources are available. Internal rate of return IRR is similar to NPV in process, but is slightly more difficult to calculate. The IRR is the discount rate at which NPV is 0. Finding an IRR solution involves trial and error. You keep plugging in different discount rates and see which one drives the NPV to 0. You can compare the IRR value to other projects or to a company standard to see which projects should get priority. If the organization has set a minimum value of 8% and the project IRR is 15%, you have a positive situation and you should do the project. If the project IRR turns out to be 6%, you might not get permission to do the project. Using the same example as before for NPV, the IRR turns out to be 19.8% for Project 1 and 26.6% for Project 2. With the discount rate set at 8%, both projects return a positive value. If you must choose one project over the other, then choose Project 2, which has the higher IRR. Return on investment ROI provides the percentage return expected over the life of the project using the following formula. ROI equals total discounted benefits, total discounted costs, / total discounted costs. Let's look at an example using the same numbers from the example used to calculate NPV. You first determine the discount factor for each year and then multiply each benefit and cost for that year by its discount factor. Year do the math discount factor. Lowing. ROI Project 1 equals $436,000 to $367,100 $367. 100 equals 19% ROI. Project 2 equals $277,800 to $236,400 $236. 400 equals 18% if you must choose one project over the other. Then the team should choose Project 1, which has the higher ROI, but by a slim margin. Payback period. The payback period is the amount of time it will take a project before the accrued benefits surpass accrued costs, or how much time an investment takes to recover its initial cost. As with the other quantitative models, many organizations have a maximum number in mind that all projects must meet or beat. If an IT project has a payback period of 4 years, but the organization demands 2 years, then either you won't be allowed to proceed with the project or you must make adjustments to change the equation. Using the numbers from the NPV model example earlier, you calculate the payback period by first tracking the net cash flow across each year to determine the year when net benefits overtake net costs. For Project 1, this occurs sometime in year 4, and for Project 2 sometime in year 3. See the following numbers. The payback period ignores the time value of money, but offers a glimpse at the potential risk associated with each of the projects. A longer payback period generally infers a riskier project. The longer it takes before a project begins to make money for the organization, the greater the chances that things can go wrong on the project. Because of these drawbacks, the payback period is not generally used in isolation, but is combined with other measures or is used as an initial deal breaker. Organizations can set a maximum number of periods, such as 18 months, and any project that doesn't T-break even before the maximum is not considered further. In the next section, all the project selection methods are brought together and used to build a weighted scoring model to help management make project selection decisions. Weighted scoring model, the WSEM, is a culmination of all the other models discussed so far in this chapter. It is used to evaluate all projects on as equal a basis as is humanly possible. It attempts to remove human bias in the project selection process. The criteria used to compare projects differs from one organization to another and may differ between types and classes of projects within the same organization. For example, some organizations use different models based on the size and length of their projects. The projects are rated small, medium, and large, and each group has its own set of criteria. Many times, medium-sized projects use the entire criteria set from a small project set of elements with some additional elements, and large projects use the medium-sized project set of criteria with additional elements. Figure 4.1 shows an example of the WSEM for a large project. The criteria used to make decisions are listed in the first column of the table. These are by no means the only elements an organization might use to base their decision. As stated earlier, if you had a small system upgrade project that was being done because the vendor was dropping support on the current software, the chart would look quite a bit different. The second column contains the weight assigned to each criterion. Notice that some have higher weights, more importance, than others. At different times or for different types of projects, organizations change the importance of each criterion. For example, for all IT projects, an organization might emphasize strong customer support and strategic plan alignment, as shown in the example in Figure 4.1. During tough economic times, the organization might want to stress the financial measures, NPAV, IRR, and ROI for all projects. Using these weights allows the organization to change the priorities and use the appropriate priorities in the decision-making process. The assignment of weights to each criterion can become a lengthy and sometimes heated process, as each person tries to get a high rating for his or her own favorite criterion. Care must be taken to not alienate individuals and to come to a consensus of opinion. The final set of columns in Figure 4.1 contains the results for each project based on a standard scale. The same rates must be used on all projects under consideration. The rates used aren't as important as the uniform application of those rates. Table 4.1 shows the rates that were used in this example. If a criterion is rated high for a particular project, it receives a score of 70, and if it is rated poor, it receives a score of 0. Next, let's look at some examples from Figure 4.1 and Table 4.1 in more detail. For the criterion market share effect, if the project will raise the organization's market share significantly, it receives a 70. If the project will have no effect or a negative effect, it receives a 0 score. For the criterion risk, the numbers work in the opposite direction. If the project has a high amount of risk, it receives a low score, and if it has relatively low risk, it receives a high score. Risk is discussed in more detail in Chapter 8, but for now, just know that although you can never get rid of all the risk in a project, there are ways to reduce risk and its effect on a project. Finally, you assign each criterion a score across all projects and enter those numbers in the table. Some of these scores are subjective, but as long as the SMEs are evaluating them consistently, you should end up with consistent results. Some organizations set up ranges for some of the criteria. For example, if the NPV is within certain ranges, you assign an appropriate score. If NPV is between $500 and $1,000, some use a percentage of the project cost instead of an exact dollar amount. You assign a score of 10. If it is between $1,000 and $5,000, you assign a score of 30, and so on. The last step is to multiply each score by its weight and then sum the results. In Figure 4.1, you can see that Project 1 received a score of 53, Project 2 got a score of 54, Project 3 was scored 43, and Project 4 received a score of 26.5. Based on these results, Project 2 has the highest score and should be done first, but Project 1's score was so close that it should also be looked at if enough resources exist to do both. Two final thoughts need to be discussed about the WSEM before we move on. First, notice that there are no descriptive names attached to the projects, just numbers are used. Many organizations prefer that the names be left off this chart to help reduce bias in the final decision. The decision should be based on the merits of the results presented in the chart. Second, even though we have seemingly reduced the decision down to a table of numbers, humans must make the final decisions. Each of these numbers is based on subjective evidence and thus will always require humans in the process. Before moving on to the creation of the first project deliverable and the project charter, and how to conduct a stakeholder analysis, let's discuss two alternative methods organizations can use to aid in the process of making project decisions: the balanced scorecard and real options. Additional project valuation techniques. Balanced scorecard. The balanced scorecard approach was developed in the early 1990s by Drs. Robert Kaplan, Harvard Business School, and David Norton, co-founder and president of Balanced Scorecard Collaborative Incorporated, based in Boston, USA. This approach gives a company the ability to identify what it should measure to balance the financial perspective of the organization. The balanced scorecard approach suggests that the organization be viewed from four perspectives. See Figure 4.2. Figure 4. To the balanced scorecard perspectives reprinted by permission of Harvard Business School Press. From The Balanced Scorecard, Translating Strategy into Action, by Robert S. Kaplan and David P. Norton. Boston, Massachusetts, 1996. Page 9. Copyright 1996 by the Harvard Business School Publishing Corporation. All rights reserved. Source: Using the Balanced Scorecard as a Strategic Management System, by Robert S. Kaplan and David P. Norton, Harvard Business Review, January-February 1996. Financial: The strategy for growth, profitability, and risk, viewed from the perspective of the shareholder. Customer: The strategy for creating value and differentiation from the perspective of the customer. Internal business: The strategic priorities for various business processes, which create customer and shareholder satisfaction. Learning and growth: The priorities for creating a climate that supports organizational change, innovation, and growth. In addition, the organization needs to develop metrics, collect data relative to each of these perspectives, and analyze the data. The balanced scorecard model is widely implemented across many diverse industries and organizations for alignment to business strategy and vision. Studies indicate that more than 60% of the Fortune 500 companies currently use the balanced scorecard in some form. Brewer, Jeffrey L., and Kevin C. Dittman. Methods of IT Project Management, 4th edition, Purdue University Press, 2022. ProQuest eBook Central, http://ebookcentral.pirocast.com/lib/herzing-ebooks/detail.action?mark.id = 6903522. Created from Herzing eBooks on July 22, 2025, 23:35 and 5 seconds. Copyright 2022. Purdue University Press. All rights reserved. Ebook pages 99 to 139, printed page 15 of 38. Real Options: The Movement Toward the Real Options Methodology for IT Project Portfolio Management derives from a financial model that considers the management of a portfolio of stock investment options. This theory became most widely acknowledged outside the finance sector when Professor Robert C. Merton, Harvard University, and Professor Myron S. Scholes, Stanford University, were jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for the development of a new method to determine the value of derivatives in 1995 from the application of their computational formula developed in 1973. Today, only around 30% of CFOs are using a real options approach to make investment decisions, although real options theory is widely acknowledged as achieving better results than traditional valuation methods. It has, however, so far not gained as much importance in practice as it maybe deserves. This is mainly due to the options theory being very mathematical and rather difficult to understand. A fundamental definition of option is the right, but not the obligation, to buy, call option, or sell, put option, an investment holding at a predetermined price, called the exercise price or strike price, at some particular date in the future. Lattimore, D. 2002, page 2. Real options allows an organization to value IT projects in a manner like the way we value stock options. A stock option lets us make a small investment today to reduce our risk later on. At the same time, it keeps open the possibility of making a bigger investment later if the future goes the way we expect it to. Applying that thinking to IT projects through a relatively new approach, the real options methodology, can lead to better project valuation, capital budgeting, and strategic planning. The more uncertain the times, the more valuable an options approach becomes. The use of real options in IT is still in its infancy, but other industries have used real options valuation for some time. In the fast-moving world of IT, demand, technology changes, factor prices, and many other parameters vary widely. A real options approach lets managers consider that uncertainty and how they might best react to it. IBM defines 2 types of real options. Growth options give a firm the ability to increase its future business. Examples include research and development, brand development, mergers and acquisitions, leasing or developing land, or, most pertinent, launching a technology initiative. Flexibility options, on the other hand, give a company the ability to change its plans in the future. Management can purchase the option to delay, expand, contract, switch uses, outsource, or abandon projects. Lattimore, D. 2002, page 3. Viewing an investment as an option allows projects to be evaluated and managed in respect to future value and a dynamic business environment. The acknowledgement of a dynamic business environment introduces the concept of an iterative valuation process that reflects changing business objectives or environmental conditions and opportunities. To make real options easier to understand, T.A. Lerman, 1998a, used the analogy of a tomato garden. In a tomato garden, not all the tomatoes are ripe at the same time. Some are ready to pick right now, some are rotten and should be thrown away, and some will be ready to harvest at a later date. We can apply this line of thinking for evaluating investments. Traditionally, the evaluation of investments has been limited to a yes/no ripe or rotten decision based solely on NPEV. With real options, an investment with a negative NPV may still be good, but perhaps it's just not the right time. It's not ripe yet. If you can delay until the proper time, now ripe, your once negative NPV would be positive. Figure 4, 3 divides a tomato garden option space into 6 regions with definitions of the types of options that fall into each region and directions about how to handle them. The regions are defined as follows. Region 1. This region is a now or never area where either all the unknowns about an investment have been determined or the time to decide is up. If the investment has a value to cost greater than 1, you should invest. Region 2, investment in this region, is currently showing a value to cost greater than 1, but it is still not time to invest. The line dividing Region 2 and Region 3 equates to the NPV of the option. In Region 2, the NPV is greater than 0. Region 3, investment in this region, is currently showing a value to cost greater than 1, but it is still not time to invest. In Region 3, the NPV is less than 0. Region 4, investment in this region, has a value to cost ratio of less than 1. This would not be pursued unless conditions are improved to make it a worthy investment before time runs out. Region 5, investment in this region, has a value to cost ratio of less than 1. This would not be pursued unless conditions are drastically improved to make it a worthy investment before time runs out. Reprinted by permission of Harvard Business Review. The Tomato Garden exhibit from Strategy as a Portfolio of Real Options by Timothy A. Luhrmann, September-October 1998. Copyright 1998 by the Harvard Business School Publishing Corporation. All rights reserved. Region 6. This region is a now or never area where either all the unknowns about an investment have been determined or the time to decide is up. If the investment has a value to cost below 1, you should not invest. Based on this model, managers should nurture the investments in Regions 3 and 4 to attempt to increase their value or reduce their cost, thus improving their locations to Regions 1 or 2. Plotting related options in the tomato garden will help managers understand where they need to focus their attention. As in a real tomato garden, managers need to constantly monitor and reevaluate the options and their locations to strive for the best yields. This completes our section on project selection techniques. As you can see, a variety of choices are available to help organizations become better at selecting the right projects. Many studies have been done to review the use and effectiveness of these techniques. The problem in trying to draw any conclusions from these studies is that they all address different industry segments over different time periods using different technologies. The choice of which techniques to use is based on many factors: company culture, financial position, industry segment, technology proposed, length of project, size of project, and so on. Organizations should use a method that builds a weighted scoring model, which consists of elements and weights that are pertinent to the organization at a point in time and circumstances. It is not the mission of this text to prescribe which methods must be used, but to give several choices to choose from to enable the best selection of projects. The next section assumes that a selection of projects has been made, and it is time to begin working on them. The next step is to conduct a stakeholder analysis to identify stakeholders and assess their attitudes and involvement with the project. Stakeholder analysis. A stakeholder analysis, which identifies the stakeholders' process from the project stakeholder management knowledge area, identifies the influence and interests of the various stakeholders and documents their needs, wants, and expectations. These needs and wants form the basis of the scope statement described in Chapter 5. Another part of the stakeholder analysis deals with influence, power, and interest in the project. This second piece of information plays an important part in the success of most projects. Successful project managers must learn to perform accurate stakeholder analyses. The results of doing a stakeholder analysis are best documented in a spreadsheet that should be kept and reused on each project that shares a particular stakeholder. Much of the information collected, see Figure 4.5, is of a very personal nature and can be reused from project to project. Most of the information is shared with the rest of the team, but some of the information, such as items of a very personal nature, are best kept private. A long time ago, Sun Tzu, a Chinese general, said the following concerning knowing your stakeholders: if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Clavel, 1983. We don't want to insinuate that stakeholders are the enemy. Quite the contrary. If dealt with correctly, they become your best allies. The stakeholder analysis process consists of the following steps. Identify all potential stakeholders. Determine interests, expectations, and influence for each. Build a stakeholder assessment matrix. See Figure 4.5. Analyze appropriate stakeholder approach strategies and update the matrix. Update throughout the project. The first step, before collecting information from stakeholders, is to correctly identify who the stakeholders are and where they come from. Figure 4 shows the many places you should look to find stakeholders. Usually, the easiest stakeholders to locate are those internal to the organization. For example, if you're installing a new software package for the accounting department, you first look for stakeholders in the accounting department. Then, you might need to include the CFO, CEO, and related IT personnel, operations, analysts, developers, and so on. Next, you can move on to the immediate environment of potential suppliers of the software and maybe additional hardware vendors, customers, creditors, shareholders, and competitors. When all these have been documented, you can move on to the broader environment, which includes international concerns, political concerns, if the accounting package was purchased to meet Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, for example, and social, economic, and technological concerns. A concerted effort is needed to include everyone who might have an interest in the project. The next step is to conduct research to complete the matrix shown in Figure 4.5 by conducting interviews with subject matter experts and referring to previous notes generated during the building of the business case or on previous projects. Figure 4.5 is an example of a stakeholder assessment matrix, or referred to as the stakeholder register in the 5th edition of the PMBOK. The techniques used for getting the information are personal interviews, group meetings, and historical information. Collectively, these techniques are referred to as performing a stakeholder analysis. The first column of the matrix lists the name and sometimes the department or organization in which the stakeholder works. The second column describes the stakeholder's interest in or goals for this project. The third column describes the influence this person will have on decisions and ultimately the outcome of the project. The fourth column is one you might want to keep private, depending on the nature of the information. Unique information can be job-related, but often is information about stakeholders' personal lives, anything that may aid the project manager in formulating an approach strategy. The fifth column is the official role the stakeholder will play during the project. And finally, the last column describes the approach the project manager and the team should take in working with each stakeholder. The final step in the stakeholder assessment process is to make sure to update this information throughout the life of the project so it is as accurate as possible for future projects. If it is accurate, there is no need to start from scratch to generate this information the next time you work with a particular stakeholder. Depending on the length of time between encounters, you might need to update the information, but this should give you a great start. After completing the stakeholder analysis, the team is ready to turn its attention to the first deliverable of every project, regardless of characteristics such as size and risk, the project charter. Project Charter. The Project Charter is the first tangible revision-controlled work product created in all projects, regardless of size and product development methodology. Even the smallest projects can benefit from doing an abbreviated charter. Figure 4 6 shows an example of a standard project charter. Don't panic if you don't understand some of the sections in the charter. The text has covered only a few of its elements so far. During the next several chapters, the other elements will be explained in detail, and you will learn exactly how to fill out each part of the charter. The project charter is the first work product that is placed under configuration control, the process that controls any and all changes made to a project after the charter has been signed. Notice toward the bottom of the charter that a section has been reserved for approvals. The key stakeholders of the project are required to sign the charter before any work begins and the project proceeds. The key stakeholders are the executive sponsor and any manager who has resources involved in the project. Once the charter is signed, no one should be allowed to make changes to it unless it goes through the formal change control process. Before moving on, a couple of best practices when it comes to creating project charters. First, it should not be created in isolation. Like the project selection process, the charter requires input from many sources. Information is retrieved from the business case, the organization's strategic plan, SMEs, sponsors, project leaders, and so on. Second, it is not a novel. It should be short and to the point. It should not be any longer than is absolutely necessary. For a simple project, a page or less may be sufficient. For a longer project with more risk, time, and dollars, several pages will be required to capture the required information. But remember that to get full sponsor support, sponsors must understand and agree to everything contained in the project charter. The main purpose of the project charter is to first get a sponsor to take ownership of the project and, second, to make sure that at the outset of the project, everyone is on the same page and agrees to the project objectives. Project title. A project charter needs a short, action-oriented title, usually starting with an action verb. Many organizations like to create a short form of the title using the first letter of each word, such as Upgrade Project Software, UPS. The title needs to be long enough for people to differentiate from others, but short enough to be remembered. Project date. This is the date the charter was completed and ready for authorized signatures. Version. Once signed, the project charter is under configuration version control. If anything in the project changes and affects this document, a new version should be created, and a new version number should be assigned. Description. This includes business needs, project purpose, justification for the project based on market demand, business need, customer request, technological advance, legal requirement, social need, and information that will tie in with the organization's strategic plan. Project manager. This is the name of the person assigned as the manager of the project, who could be internal or external to the organization. Authority level. The charter needs to specify the amount of authority the project manager and others have to make project decisions without approval from others. The authority level covers all aspects of the project, including scope, time, and cost. For example, a certain authority level may allow the project manager to make decisions that have an impact on cost of less than 10% of the entire budget and or less than a fixed dollar amount of, say, $1,000. Objectives. Objectives are written at a high level and cover the major project objectives. The template contains bullet points to reinforce the idea that these do not need to be complete sentences. The key purpose in the objectives section is to clearly state the boundaries of the project. It is just as important to state what is not included as it is to state what is included. The objective statements should be future outcome-based. For example, the update to the inventory control software will allow the warehouse to cut overhead expenses by 25%. Major deliverable schedule. Each objective needs to be listed in this section, along with a projected delivery date. Keep in mind that you are very early in the process and haven't even begun the project, so coming up with a specific date will be difficult or even impossible. If the sponsor or the organization's management team requires a date, you should try to use a month, April, or quarter. third quarter and not get locked into an exact date. This section also shows the order in which the objectives will be worked on and completed. For some projects, customers have exact need-by dates for parts of the project due to government regulations, interdependencies with other projects, or competitive pressures. In these cases, you need to make sure these dates are noted and explained. The explanation should include the negative consequences of not meeting the due dates. Critical success factors. This is a list of metrics that will be tracked to measure success. The metrics may be different on every project and need to be generated by the project sponsor. Like the objectives, these need to be short and to the point. They should be defined in the form of goals. George Doran coined the acronym SMART for specific, measurable, assignable, preferably to one person or at a minimum one group, realistic, and time-related, as a way to aid in the goal creation process. When all the goals or success factors have been achieved, the project is complete and successful. Assumptions/constraints/risks. The project charter needs to contain a list of issues that can affect the outcome of one or more of the objectives, and thus the project, and need to be monitored or mitigated. These are items significant enough that they need to be brought to the attention of the sponsor and upper management. Relevant regulatory agency policies and procedures should be noted in this section. Any specific security issues should be described in this section. Key roles and responsibilities. The project charter needs to list the names, roles, and responsibilities required to complete the project successfully. The names at this stage in the project are generally tied to job function or departments and not individuals. For example, the names might be database support, network support, or human resources management. The roles describe what the named person or function will be doing on this particular project. The responsibilities are more specific, such as schedule staff, perform appraisals, or perform logical and physical data modeling. Approvals. Finally, a project charter needs a list of names and signatures of people who agree with the stated objectives and critical success factors, and who authorize the start of the project. Kickoff meeting. With the completion of the stakeholder analysis and the signing of the project charter, it's time to schedule and conduct the kickoff meeting. It seems at first glance to be a trivial event, but the kickoff meeting needs to be well planned to ensure that the project starts on the right foot. A project can be difficult enough during execution. You don't want to make it even harder by skipping the kickoff meeting. The first step is to make sure to invite the right people, which you can determine from your updated stakeholder assessment matrix. Refer to Figure 4.5. If someone who should be at the kickoff is not invited, that person might turn against the project and not participate. It is easier to invite everyone connected and run the risk of inviting someone who doesn't need to be there than to forget someone. The meeting should be called, organized, and run by the key sponsor, with support from the project manager. Many times in the past on IT projects, the IT project manager did the scheduling, and the project quickly became an IT project that lost key support. The kickoff meeting allows everyone to hear the same message and agree publicly to provide support. Finally, the kickoff meeting can be a festive event, complete with hats, mouse pads, coffee mugs, and other items with the project name or acronym printed on them to get everyone excited about the project. It is a good way to get the project off to a great start. In the How to Conduct the Project Initiation Process section, later in this chapter, a sample kickoff meeting agenda is provided. Proven strategies and hints to success in an Agile World. A common wiki tool created by the Information Technology Division of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to propose a common methodology for project management in the state, offers the following best practices for conducting the kickoff meeting. Every project requires a formal kickoff to bring together the team and stakeholders. Make sure to invite the right people. Material needed before organizing the meeting. Project charter. Skills needed in the team. Roles and responsibilities at a high level. Communication plan. Develop and disseminate the meeting agenda well before the meeting. The agenda includes project goals and objectives, high-level plan with deliverables, critical success factors, and project complete acceptance criteria, early risks and issues identified, communication strategy, change management plan. Project selection and the initiation process. This section describes the steps necessary to complete the selection process. The project selection process is as follows. Project sponsors prepare the business case for the project, including qualitative and quantitative information as appropriate or required by the organization. This is performed for each project being considered. The business cases for all the projects are collected by the organization's steering committee staff and separated into categories: research, mandates, strategic direction, market advantage, and so on. The projects can then be compared to others in the same categories. The categories are specific to the organization's industry and mission. The steering committee meets physically or virtually to review the organization's strategic plan and current environment and economic situation. The plan may have been written as much as 1 or 2 years earlier, so before project decisions are made, the organization's current situation needs to be reviewed and evaluated. The steering committee builds a WSEM for each project within each category, using the appropriate metrics. The steering committee reviews the resource availability needs of each project and compares them to what is currently available. It would be great to always select the best projects, but this might not be feasible if 2 projects require the same resource full-time. The company must then decide not to do both projects or to acquire additional resources. If additional resources are acquired, the project cost structure must be updated. The steering committee manager selects the projects and commits the associated resources. The selected project manager conducts the stakeholder analysis with aid from SMEs. The steering committee staff creates the project charter with the aid of the selected project manager. The project manager should be picked based on the needs of the project. A complex critical project should have a senior project leader assigned, and a simple, non-critical project should have a less senior project leader assigned. The project manager's experience should also be taken into consideration. If the project is to update the organization's accounting software, a project manager with accounting background should be selected. The project manager must get the project charter signed by the appropriate stakeholders, securing their support for the project. The project manager, in association with the project sponsor, conducts the kickoff meeting. Many organizations have the sponsor run the meeting and make the invitations to increase the visibility of the sponsor to all stakeholders. How TO conduct the project selection and initiation process in this section. The R&S Amusement Services case study is used to demonstrate the process of project initiation. Subsequent chapters follow a similar pattern building on the examples presented here. This section walks through the 10-step project initiation process presented in the previous section. Before proceeding, review the case study at the beginning of this chapter, which depicts the last step in the process, the project kickoff meeting. Before hosting the kickoff meeting, the consultants from PPMS and key members of the R&S Amusement Services team had a lot of work to do. Let's go back in time and begin with the building of the business case and the other deliverables that are created during project initiation and used during the kickoff meeting. Step 1. Preparing the business case. Jeff and Kevin from PPMS are helping decide which projects it should tackle first. Jeff and Kevin, working with Reed Lewis, built a 3-year strategic plan for the organization. After the strategic plan was put together, a detailed analysis of the business was conducted with all members of R&S to determine which areas needed the most attention. The team came up with 9 areas that needed immediate work. Jeff and Kevin discussed with Reed the pitfalls of taking on too many projects and not having enough resources to do them properly, and it was decided to let the projects speak for themselves through a business case and a WSEM for each of the 9 projects. Jeff and Kevin worked with key R&S associates from each area to build the business cases. Each business case was written using the same format. The business case for the asset management project is presented here, and it has the following sections. Business case, asset management objectives. System will have the ability to track the location of every amusement asset, on-site or in the field, and its level of usability, active, repair, obsolete, etc. Items in inventory include game machines, dollar bill changers, external speakers. Maintenance parts inventory information is updated continually in real-time. Generate requisitions ability to generate ad hoc reports generated by users. Track vendor information. Track asset performance. Primary sponsor. Mark Lewis consequences of not doing the project. Lost revenue due to not having the correct items at the correct time at the correct location. Continue to incur expenses for overordering or underordering. Will not gain productivity enhancements. The new automated system will provide customer dissatisfaction. Continues to increase, leading to lost sales, benefits, and costs. 3-year estimates. Estimated costs. Year 1, $50,000. Year 2, $10,000. Year 3, $4,000. Estimated revenue. Year 1, $5,000. Year 2, $50,000. Year 3, $50,000. Risks. Low end-user involvement. Clear statement of requirements. Proper selection of software product, vendor, and implementation technology. Selected cost and time. Estimate errors. Financial models. EPAV, $25,957 ROI. $94,500 to $62,740. $62,740 equals 51% payback. Occurs early in year 3. Strategic plan alignment. Asset management has a direct tie to several items on the strategic plan. Reducing costs through better management of resources, increasing productivity, and improving the quality of decisions by increasing the quality of information. Key objectives and benefits. Key sponsor. The consequences of not doing the project. 3 years worth of financial benefits and costs. All identified risks. The financial models. EPIV, ROI. And payback. How well the project supports the strategic plan of the business. Step 2. Creating the steering committee. Jeff and Kevin assisted Reed Lewis with the selection of the IT project steering committee, making sure that all business departments were represented fairly. They selected Reed Lewis, Danny Calloway, lead coordinator, Diana Brooks, business operations manager, Mark Lewis, manager of the West Lafayette location, and Ashley Brooks, finance administrator. Each member of the steering committee was given 1 vote and an equal say in the decisions. Step 3. Reviewing the strategic plan and the current situation. The steering committee held its first meeting and discussed the process and procedures it was to follow. Each person had been given a copy of the strategic plan and was being asked for any questions. Each person presented a current state of the business report from the perspective of his or her department. This brought everyone up to speed on the many challenges the company as a whole was facing and the 9 projects submitted for consideration to help solve these challenges. Step 4. Building the WSEM. Once everyone was satisfied that they were on the same page and understood the company's strategic plan, they were ready to begin building the WSEM. The first task was to build the list of selection criteria and then assign weights. After many hours of organized discussion, the committee decided that the following items would appear on the list: strategic plan alignment, ROI, NPEV, risk, and customer support. Jeff and Kevin had warned Reed that selecting the categories was the easy part, and assigning the weights could be a long process, as each committee member voices an opinion. Reed was great at letting the committee come to a consensus without enforcing his will as the president. Each member was asked to try to keep the future of the entire business at the center of his or her thoughts. The committee, after several hours of debate, was able to assign weights to the criteria, making sure the total was equal to 100%, strategic plan alignment, 30% customer support, 15% risk. 20% NPV, 20% ROI, 15%. The next step was to decide how to assign scores to the information presented in each of the business cases. To assign values to the results, some qualitative and some quantitative value assignments needed to be made and be used uniformly across all projects. Jeff and Kevin explained to the team that it was important to use the same relative values for each criterion. The team decided to use a 3 low, 3 medium, and 3 high assignment value system. The low range values are 0, 10, and 20. The medium range values are 40, 50, and 60, and the high range values are 80, 90, and 100. For example, using the strategic plan alignment criterion, if the project didn't directly support an initiative on the strategic plan, or if there was a very weak link, it would receive one of the low scores. If the project directly supported an item on the plan and was integral to its success, it would receive one of the high scores, and if it was linked to an item on the strategic plan but played a very minor role, it would receive one of the medium scores. When scoring one of the financial results, the team set up more quantitative ranges. For example, if the ROI was more than 25%, the project received a high range value. If the ROI was between 10% to 24%, it received a medium range score, and if the payback was lower than 10%, it received a low range value. Each criterion is evaluated using a similar process. The trick is to use the same thought process for each project for each criterion. Figure 4.7 shows the W631 for R&S amusement services. Figure 4.7 R&S amusement services weighted scoring model. The project numbers refer to the projects outlined in the case study. The 3 projects receiving the highest scores were Project 1, Customer Contract Management Project 3, Asset Management Project 5, Collection Management R&S. Will therefore work on these 3 projects first. The decision of which one is done first or which ones can be done at the same time is based on 3 main factors: availability of funds, availability of resources, interdependencies of projects. Step 5. Reviewing resource needs and availability. When the committee reviewed the W631, it found that 3 projects scored significantly higher than the other 6. Projects 1, 3, and 5. The next step for the steering committee was to review resource requirements for the top projects and assess R&S's resource availability to determine how many projects can be done at once and in what order. 4. Example, if Project 1 and Project 3 both required the same resource full-time, R&S couldn't do both projects at the same time unless it acquired additional resources, either by hiring new people or hiring temporary services, or it took much longer to do each one. Step 6. Selecting projects. After reviewing the resource requirements, R&S decided that it could do all 3 of the projects at the same time. Information collected while building each project's business case was then used to generate the project charters. The steering committee then had to select a project manager who was the best fit for each project. The selected project manager would then be utilized to help build the project charter. Because R&S Amusement Services has very little experience running IT projects, Jeff and Kevin were asked to run each of these projects with the assistance of selected R&S associates. It was hoped that in addition to running successful projects, Jeff and Kevin could help train R&S associates in the art of running projects. The 3 R&S Amusement Services associates chosen to lead the projects are Mark Lewis, the manager of West Lafayette location, Project 3, Diana Brooks, the business operations manager, Project 1, and Ashley Brooks, the finance administrator, Project 5. Step 7. Conducting a stakeholder analysis. Kevin and Jeff worked with members of the steering committee to conduct a stakeholder analysis. They followed the process described earlier in this chapter. A sample of the results of the analysis is contained in Figure 4. 8. Step 8. Creating the project charter. A project charter was created for each of the selected projects. The project charters were created by Jeff and Kevin from PPMS, with assistance from R&S Amusement Services Associates. As stated earlier in this chapter, a project charter serves several purposes. Because R&S is new to project management, it was very important that the charter spell out the exact authority and role of each participant. It was also decided that R&S would move to a matrix style of organization to replace the original functional style. The following is an example of one of the charters. Step 9. Securing sponsor signatures on charter. Jeff Dunbar and Kevin Pullen explain the importance of getting user buy-in to make these projects successful. After the creation of the project charters, Jeff and Kevin made individual appointments with each of the key stakeholders to make sure they understood all the information presented in the charter and to answer any questions they might have. At the end of each meeting, Jeff and Kevin were able to get the stakeholders to sign the charter, showing their full support. Step 10. Conducting the kickoff meeting. Finally, it was time for the kickoff meeting, which is where we began in the opening of this chapter. You now have an appreciation for all the work that goes into the decisions about what projects to work on and the information presented at a kickoff meeting. The 3 projects presented in this chapter will be used throughout the remainder of the text. We present tools and techniques appropriate for each phase of the project and then use these projects to show concrete examples of what the deliverables look like and how to build them. Chapter review. In most organizations, there are more projects than there are resources to support them. Organizations need to follow a disciplined project selection process to ensure that they are working on the correct mix of projects. IT professionals must understand the system's context in which the project they are working on exists. The following 4 key issues will assist in understanding the business context: business value, technology, cost/benefit questions, and risks. A business case is a document composed of a set of project characteristics that aid organization decision-makers in deciding what projects to work on. The key parts are objectives, methods and sources, benefits, consequences, costs, qualitative and quantitative models, and risks. A project may be undertaken to fulfill an initiative as part of an organization's strategic plan. IT has become a strategic enabler of most or all of the items on strategic plans. Project selection techniques fall into 2 groups: qualitative models and quantitative models. Qualitative models consist of relying on SME judgments, sacred cow decisions, and mandates. The quantitative models are NPV, IRR, ROI, and payback period. The WSEM is used to compare the merits of projects based on the organization's specific priorities, such as risk, financial concerns, strategic plan initiative, and competition. Each project is evaluated fairly, based on its relative score in the model. The balanced scorecard approach was developed in the early 1990s to enable companies to identify what they should measure to balance the financial perspective of the organization. The organization should be viewed from 4 perspectives: financial, customer, internal business process, and learning and growth. Real Options is a methodology that allows an organization to select a mix of projects derived from a financial model of managing a portfolio of stock investment options. A stakeholder analysis is used first to identify all possible stakeholders for the project and then to document their influence, wants, expectations, needs, and interests in the project. This information will form the basis of the scope statement. A project charter is the key deliverable of the initiation phase of every project, regardless of size. The charter officially recognizes the start of a project for all stakeholders. Once signed, the charter should be placed under configuration control. The charter consists of the project title and active date, the version number, a short project description, the project manager's name and authority level, project objectives, major deliverables, critical success factors, assumptions, constraints, risks, and key role responsibilities. The last section consists of key project stakeholder signatures, signifying their approval of the charter and thus the project. The kickoff meeting is organized by the project sponsor to officially announce the start of the project. The project charter should be used to provide information for all participants. Many times, the key stakeholders are asked to sign the charter at the conclusion of the meeting. Chapter review. In most organizations, there are more projects than there are resources to support them. Organizations need to follow a disciplined project selection process to ensure that they are working on the correct mix of projects. IT professionals must understand the system's context in which the project they are working on exists. The following 4 key issues will assist in understanding the business context: business value, technology, cost/benefit questions, and risks. A business case is a document composed of a set of project characteristics that aid organization decision-makers in deciding what projects to work on. The key parts are objectives, methods and sources, benefits, consequences, costs, qualitative and quantitative models, and risks. A project may be undertaken to fulfill an initiative as part of an organization's strategic plan. IT has become a strategic enabler of most or all of the items on strategic plans. Project selection techniques fall into 2 groups: qualitative models and quantitative models. Qualitative models consist of relying on SME judgments, sacred cow decisions, and mandates. The quantitative models are NPV, IRR, ROI, and payback period. The WSEM is used to compare the merits of projects based on the organization's specific priorities, such as risk, financial concerns, strategic plan initiative, and competition. Each project is evaluated fairly, based on its relative score in the model. The balanced scorecard approach was developed in the early 1990s to enable companies to identify what they should measure to balance the financial perspective of the organization. The organization should be viewed from 4 perspectives: financial, customer, internal business process, and learning and growth. Real Options is a methodology that allows an organization to select a mix of projects derived from a financial model of managing a portfolio of stock investment options. A stakeholder analysis is used first to identify all possible stakeholders for the project and then to document their influence, wants, expectations, needs, and interests in the project. This information will form the basis of the scope statement. A project charter is the key deliverable of the initiation phase of every project, regardless of size. The charter officially recognizes the start of a project for all stakeholders. Once signed, the charter should be placed under configuration control. The charter consists of the project title and active date, the version number, a short project description, the project manager's name and authority level, project objectives, major deliverables, critical success factors, assumptions, constraints, risks, and key role responsibilities. The last section consists of key project stakeholder signatures, signifying their approval of the charter and thus the project. The kickoff meeting is organized by the project sponsor to officially announce the start of the project. The project charter should be used to provide information for all participants. Many times, the key stakeholders are asked to sign the charter at the conclusion of the meeting. What do each of these vision statements have in common? They meet the following 4 criteria for good vision statements. Brief. A vision statement should be no more than 1 or 2 sentences. Instagram's original vision statement was capture and share the world's moments. Nike's original vision statement was crush Adidas. Both of these are brief, compelling, and memorable. Compelling. A vision statement should motivate people to want to go to work. It should draw people in. Oxfam's vision statement gives you a good reason to get up and go to work in the morning. I don't know anyone who doesn't want a just world without poverty. Memorable. Everyone at the organization should be able to recite the vision statement. For that to happen, they have to be both brief and compelling. Cold Stone Creamery's vision statement is the ultimate ice cream experience. That's a good vision statement because it is definitely more memorable than something like, "We make good ice cream." Begin with the end in mind. Vision statements should speak as if the future the organization is striving for is here now. This can be written as a problem that has been solved or changes that have been made. The vision statement for the Alzheimer's Association is a world without Alzheimer's. That is not the state we are in now, but it is brief, compelling, and memorable. It speaks of a future state as if it is currently happening. Project vision statements. Project vision statement. A brief and compelling statement that describes the future state after the project is complete. Like organizational vision statements, project vision statements should be brief, compelling, memorable, and with the end in mind. When Boeing launched the 777, they wanted a mid-sized aircraft that was technologically advanced and could operate in extreme environments, such as Denver, which is a mile above sea level, make overseas flights, and tolerate temperature extremes. All those are requirements, but none of them is particularly compelling as a vision statement. However, stating it as Denver to Honolulu on a hot day creates a visual image in the mind's eye and is compelling and more memorable than a list of requirements. Another compelling vision statement was when John F. Kennedy stated, "Before the end of the decade, landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." For the men and women working on that project, the statement was motivating, memorable, and inspiring. That vision statement wasn't compelling just to the program staff, but to most of the people on the planet as well, and it started with the end in mind. The Career Upskilling Center provides only the skills needed when they are needed. While this is not as brief and compelling as Crush Adidas, it does provide a simple way to identify the customers, the product, and how the product will meet their needs. It also identifies differentiating factors. This is a good elevator pitch for the project, and it gives the team and key stakeholders a big picture vision of what the project will accomplish. Vision statements are often used on new product development projects. Project Charter, a document that formally authorizes a project and provides a high-level description of the project. A project charter has quite a bit more detail than a project vision statement. A charter is usually developed either by the project sponsor or in a joint effort between the project sponsor and the project manager. It provides high-level information and functions as an authorization to begin the project. The contents of the charter should be tailored to meet the needs of the product, project, and organization. Table 4. 1 describes elements that are commonly found in a charter. Asterisk Table 4. 1 project charter elements element description project purpose or justification the reason the project is being undertaken. May refer to a business case, the organization's strategic plan, external factors, a contract agreement, or any other reason for performing the project. High-level project description. A summary-level description of the project. May include information on high-level product and project deliverables as well as the approach to the project. High-level requirements, the high-level conditions or capabilities that must be met to satisfy the purpose of the project. Describe the product features and functions that must be present to meet stakeholders' needs and expectations. This section does not describe the detailed requirements, as those are covered in requirements documentation. Project objectives and success criteria. Project objectives are usually established for at least scope, schedule, and cost. Scope objectives describe the scope needed to achieve the planned benefits of the project. Time objectives describe the goals for the timely completion of the project. Cost objectives describe the goals for project expenditures. High-level risks, the initial risks at a project level, such as funding availability, new technology, or lack of resources. Summary milestones schedule significant events in the project. Examples include the completion of key deliverables, the beginning or completion of a project phase, or product acceptance. Summary budget, the estimated range of expenditures for the project. Key stakeholders, a list of significant people who have an interest and an influence on the project's success. Stakeholders who do not require significant engagement may be noted in a stakeholder register rather than the charter. Project approval requirements the criteria that must be met for the project to be accepted by the customer or sponsor. Assigned project manager, responsibility, and authority level the authority of the project manager with regard to staffing, budget management and variance, technical decisions, and conflict resolution. Examples of staffing authority include the power to hire, fire, discipline, and accept or not accept project staff. Budget management refers to the ability of the project manager to commit, manage, and control project funds. Variance refers to the variance levels that require escalation for approval or rebaselining. Technical decisions define or limit the authority of the project manager to make technical decisions about deliverables or the project approach. Conflict resolution defines the degree to which the project manager can resolve conflict within the team, within the organization, and with external stakeholders. Name and authority of the sponsor or other persons authorizing the project charter the name, position, and authority of the person who oversees the project manager for the purposes of the project. Common types of authority include the ability to approve changes, determine acceptable variance limits, impact inter-project conflicts, and champion the project at a senior management level. In general, charters are used for predictive projects, and they don't change unless there is a significant change in a project objective. Case study throughout this book will be looking at a case study for the Greek God Wine Group to demonstrate predictive, adaptive, and hybrid options for working on a project. Background: the Greek God Wine Group, GGWG, is a successful winery. Due to its success, GGWG is expanding its operations by purchasing an older winery in Central California. The winery will be called Dionysus Winery. The winery has 250 acres of producing vineyards and a large, but aging production and storage facility. GGWG plans on renovating the winery and constructing a boutique hotel, restaurant, and tasting room. To ensure efficient operations, they will be installing a winery management system for inventory, production, and vineyard management. They have big plans for the winery, including a wine club and many social and recreational events. Tony Dakota, a project manager with experience in both predictive and adaptive management methods, has been brought in to manage the project. Tessa Berry is the Chief Operating Officer for GGWG. She will be the sponsor and is accountable to GGWG's Board of Directors for the successful launch and operations of the new winery. Case study vision statement: at the start of the project, Tessa and Tony met to develop a vision statement for the winery. They came up with the following: for adults who appreciate wine and good times, the Dionysus Winery is a state-of-the-art winery that caters to the fun and frivolity in all of us. Unlike other wineries that only offer wines, clubs, and tasting rooms, the Dionysus Winery will offer education and recreation activities, unique lodging, and innovative, locally sourced gourmet food. Case study charter: keeping the vision statement as a guide, Tony and Tessa developed the following charter. Dionysus Winery Charter Project Purpose: provide a fun, upscale, unique winery experience for individuals, couples, and groups. HIGH level project description: this project includes all work necessary to renovate the existing wine production facility, renovate the existing wine storage facility, develop a new winery management system for vineyard, inventory, and production management, construct a boutique hotel with 50 rooms, construct a restaurant with a 200-person capacity, construct a tasting room with room for 25 tasting stations and 250 guests, establish a wine club, hold a grand opening event to showcase Dionysus. Wines and social activities: hire and train all staff, communicate with all stakeholders as appropriate, lead multiple teams to deliver the project, manage scope, schedule, budget, resources, and risks throughout the project. and provide status updates to GGWG on a monthly basis. HIGH level requirements. The project shall meet the following conditions and capabilities. Utilize local labor wherever possible. Use a hybrid approach. Selecting the best delivery method for each deliverable while maintaining a master plan, schedule, and budget. Employ eco-friendly materials and practices. Maintain compliance with all state and local laws, regulations, and ordinances regarding vineyards, wineries, tasting rooms, lodging, staffing, and activities. Build the hotel to 4-star AAA rating standard. Build and staff the restaurant to 4-star AAA rating standard, and the grand opening shall include Dionysus wines, food from the restaurant, music, and fun activities. Project objectives and success criteria. The project will be considered a success if the following objectives are met. Manage the scope for the production, storage, vineyard, and all construction deliverables. Evolve the scope for the vineyard, inventory, and production system. Identify and evolve the scope for the grand opening and the initial social and recreational activities. Hold the grand opening no later than 12 months from the project start date, and maintain budget performance within plus or minus 10%. HIGH level risks. Areas of greatest uncertainty for this project are availability of staff with needed skills, timeliness of permits and certificates of occupancy, availability of materials, and cost of materials. Summary milestones. Schedule. The following milestones will be used to track progress. Startup, renovation complete, production and storage facilities, construction complete, hotel, restaurant, tasting room, winery management system deployed, staffing and training complete, wine club established, grand opening, and transition to operations. Summary budget. The project budget is $9 million. This does not include contingency or management reserve. Key stakeholders. The initial stakeholders are identified as Greek God Winery Group, sponsor, team, vineyard staff, local entertainers and activity vendors, other wineries, local residents, tourists/visitors, and media. Project approval requirements. The sponsor will consider the project complete when the following criteria are met. All requirements fulfilled, all permits and licenses are in hand, all venues are fully staffed, and staff is trained, the grand opening is complete, and all operations have been transitioned to staff. Assigned project manager, responsibility, and authority level. The authority of the project manager, Tony Dakota, for staffing, budget management, and technical decisions are as follows. The authority to manage all team leads, who will in turn manage and lead their team members, and the authority and accountability to estimate, monitor, and control all funds, other than salaries and operating expenses. The project manager does not have the authority to hire or fire staff, but his input will be strongly considered, sign contracts, or make technical decisions regarding viniculture, science of wine grapes, and in culture, science of winemaking. Name and authority of sponsor. The sponsor for this project is the Chief Operating Officer of the Greek God Wine Group, Tessa Berry. Tessa has overall accountability for the success of the new Dionysus winery. This includes approving schedules, budgets, staffing, changes, and variances. Tessa is the escalation point for risks, issues, and conflicts that are outside the project manager's authority. Tessa is the champion the project at a senior management level. Signatures. Assumptions and constraints. Assumption, something that is considered true for purposes of the project. From the very start of the project manager is making assumptions and working with constraints. For example, when starting a project, there may be an assumption that project staff will have sufficient skills to accomplish the work. At the beginning of the project, you may not know who will be working on the project, but you can't build a schedule or budget without making some assumptions. If at some later date you find that an assumption is not true, you may need to update the schedule or budget to reflect the new information. It's important to remember that an assumption that isn't true may lead to a risk for the project. Projects operate under a set of constraints. Constraints can be articulated via requirements, regulations, and policies. Examples of these type of constraints include maintaining compliance with local ordinances or following company policy with regard to contracts. Other constraints are more project-specific, such as fixed delivery dates or funding limitations. Constraint, a limiting or restricting factor. It is a good practice to document both assumptions and constraints in an assumption log. The following are common contents in an assumption log. Assumption log, a dynamic document that is used to identify and track assumptions and constraints. Category, having categories of assumptions and constraints, such as resources, schedule, budget, and so forth, helps organize and group assumptions and constraints. Assumption/constraint, a brief description of the assumption or constraint with enough information to understand the assumption or constraint, but without exhaustive detail. Status, the status of the assumptions such as pending, active, or closed. Comments, any additional useful information. This can include historical information, current activities to validate the assumption, implications if the assumption is not valid, and so forth. The assumption log may also include fields for a responsible party to validate the assumption, a due date, and actions. Table 4.2 shows an example of the start of an assumption log for the Dionysus Winery project. Table 4.2 Dionysus Winery Assumption Log ID Category Assumption/Constraint Status Comments A1 Skills. We assume there is a sufficient local talent pool to staff the vineyard, winery, and tasting room. Pending, since there are several wineries in the area, there are likely people with the needed skills. A2 Operations, we assume the vineyard is in good shape and will be managed by existing Greek God Wine Group staff. Confirmed vineyard operations are not part of this project, but the staff are considered important stakeholders for the project. A2 Resources, we assume construction resources are available at market rates. Pending, there has been a shortage of building materials. We assume the shortage will be addressed and not affect this project. C1 Regulatory, the production, storage, and winery facilities must be updated to the latest codes per the Alcohol Beverage Control Board, ABC. Active new regulations have been passed, and the production and storage facilities are out of compliance. Given the dynamic nature of projects, we don't always have facts about how things will evolve. Therefore, it is important to make and document assumptions about our project. Your assumption log is a living document that will continue to evolve and be updated throughout the project. Summary: in this chapter, we looked at 2 documents that can be used at project startup, a project vision statement and a project charter. We also described how an assumption log can be used to document project assumptions and constraints. We introduced the Dionysus Winery case study that will be used throughout the book. As part of introducing the case study, we documented a vision statement, project charter, and assumption log for the Dionysus Winery. In this topic area, we've examined how projects can be effectively selected and initiated. This includes an understanding of the evaluative process, important pre-start planning steps, the necessary actions and initiation, and the team needed to successfully complete the project. Additionally, we have examined the differences between different types of projects and their initiation steps. In this topic area, we will examine the concept of project scope, what it means, how it can be changed, and how to manage those changes. Scope is an important factor in project planning and overall success. We will evaluate the most effective methods to make changes to scope while a project is running and identify pitfalls when scope is changed without a proper understanding of its impact. Hybrid project planning and structure. Hybrid projects require upfront thought and planning to structure them appropriately. By structure, I mean determining the development approach you will use for each deliverable, the life cycle phases, and how you will integrate adaptive and predictive approaches in your project. You will also need to consider which elements should be in your project management plan and how detailed they need to be. Deliverables usually have various reviews and sign-offs. You can record this information plus milestones and key delivery dates in a project roadmap. In this chapter, we will cover fundamental concepts in project planning. These concepts apply throughout the project, regardless of the development approach you are using. We will review common elements in a project management plan and discuss how to tailor them. Then we will describe a project life cycle and project phases. We'll demonstrate these concepts by showing how this information would be applied to the Dionysus Winery project. Last, we'll introduce a project roadmap and show how it provides a high-level structure for the project. Planning fundamentals. There are two fundamental truths in project management. You can't know everything at the start, and you have to balance competing demands. We'll start by looking at a planning technique that accounts for the uncertain nature of projects. Progressive elaboration and rolling wave planning. Once you have a project vision statement and/or a project charter, you can start planning the project. There is usually some degree of planning at the start of the project and then varying degrees of planning as the project progresses. As discussed in Chapter 2, choosing a development approach, projects with evolving scope don't need a lot of upfront planning. With this type of project, there isn't a lot of certainty about the scope, and therefore it doesn't make sense to spend time estimating resources, duration, and budget in detail at the start of the project. Progressive elaboration, developing more detail as more information is known about the project. For projects with well-understood and well-defined scope, there is more planning up front, but not everything can or should be planned out in detail at the start of the project. This is because while the resources, schedule, and cost estimates may be fairly certain for the first 90 days, once you get too much past that, things become more uncertain. Risks and issues can occur, stakeholders can change their minds, there could be schedule delays, changes in team members, and so on. Therefore, even with waterfall projects, we expect to continually provide more detail to plans and estimates as a project progresses. This concept is known as progressive elaboration. Progressive elaboration is a fact of life on projects. Even though we would love to be able to accurately predict exactly what will be happening on day 210 of our project and how much of the budget we will have spent, it is just not possible. One way to balance the uncertainty associated with projects and the desire for predictability is to use rolling wave planning. Rolling wave planning ensures that the time spent planning is appropriate for the point of time in the project. Some people use a 90-day horizon, meaning that information for the next 90 days is documented in detail. This can include schedules with activities, dependencies, and defined durations. The cost estimates have a tighter range and resources are committed. Information from 90 to 180 days is planned in less detail. Schedules may have less detail and the cost estimates may have a wider range. The necessary skills may be identified, but some of the activities may not have specific individuals assigned yet. Work that will take place more than 6 months in the future is held at a milestone level with rough estimates for costs. Rolling wave planning, a form of progressive elaboration where activities in the near future are planned in detail and activities further out in the future are less specific. Depending on the project, you may have shorter planning waves. For projects with fixed scope that are shorter than 90 days, you can usually do a reasonably complete job of planning at the start and merely fine-tune your estimates along the way. Progressive elaboration doesn't mean you ignore the milestones and summary-level budgets from the charter. It means you don't spend a lot of time trying to get into the low level of detail for the entire project at the start. You elaborate and refine the detail as you progress through the project. Competing demands. There's a project management saying, you can have it good, you can have it fast, or you can have it cheap. Choose two. Said another way, scope, schedule, or cost, which is most important. Scope, schedule, and cost have been referred to as the iron triangle. While that is a powerful mental image, it doesn't tell the complete story. To be certain, those are 3 important constraints in projects, but they aren't the only constraints we need to be aware of. Let's look at a few examples using a project to build a custom home. Scope and quality are different. Let's say the customer wants tile floors. You can go to the local hardware store and pick up tile that costs $5 for each 12 by 12 tile. But that $5 is a very different quality from an Italian marble that is $20 for the same size tile. The scope of having tile floors may be met, but it may not meet the quality the customer was hoping for. In this example, there needs to be a balance between the constraints of quality and budget. Cost and duration are dependent on resources. In a perfect world, team members with the skills you need are readily available, and all the materials you need are local and reasonably priced. We all know that while this is possible, it is not guaranteed. Sometimes team members are on other projects, and sometimes there are supply chain issues that delay schedules and increase prices. This demonstrates the need to balance resources with schedule, budget, and perhaps even scope and quality. Risks can affect any aspect of the project, even if you have all the resources you need. A realistic schedule, agreed upon quality requirements, and sufficient budget. There is no guarantee that a risk, issue, or problem won't come along and negate everything. Therefore, I consider that every project is subject to at least the following 6 constraints: scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource, and risk. In addition, most projects are subject to regulatory constraints that are specific to an industry or profession. And let's not forget stakeholders. Stakeholders are the reason projects exist. Therefore, throughout the project, when we are balancing our competing demands, we should also consider stakeholder satisfaction among our constraints. Thus, beginning with planning a project and continuing throughout, we are always balancing and rebalancing competing demands. This takes constant attention and good judgment in order to deliver your project successfully. The Project Management Plan, a governing document for waterfall projects, is the Project Management Plan, aka Project Plan. The information in the Project Management Plan and the level of detail is dependent on the project and organizational guidance. Developing the Project Management Plan can be a time-consuming and rigorous process for large, complex projects. However, the process of developing the plan surfaces valuable information and can help the project run smoothly. Project Management Plan, a plan that describes how the project will be planned and managed. A project management plan usually has a description of the life cycle and phases and several subsidiary plans for key elements of the project. It also describes the necessary key reviews. Subsidiary plans address how specific areas of the project will be planned and managed. For example, many projects have a risk management plan that outlines how the team will identify, analyze, and respond to risks. Communications Management Plan describes the type of information that will be distributed, level of detail, format, content, and so on, identifies the audiences for each communication, outlines the timing and frequency of distribution, documents a glossary of terms. Risk Management Plan outlines roles and responsibilities for risk management, identifies budgeting and timing for risk management activities, describes risk categories, provides definitions of probability and impact, provides a probability and impact PXI matrix, describes quantitative reporting methods if used. Procurement Management Plan outlines procurement authority, roles, and responsibilities, documents the standard procurement documents, identifies contract types, documents selection criteria. Stakeholder Engagement Plan identifies the current and desired level of stakeholder engagement for categories of stakeholders, describes actions to engage stakeholders effectively, identifies relationships and interdependencies among stakeholders. Change management plan identifies how change requests will be submitted, documents process for evaluating change requests, defines the membership of the Change Control Board, outlines the authority for approving changes. Of course, there are other plans that may be appropriate for projects, such as a logistics plan, configuration management plan, and safety plan. For some projects, more detail than what is outlined above is appropriate. For other projects, less information is appropriate. Tip: look for ways to combine or reduce the number of subsidiary plans. For example, you may be able to combine the scope and quality plan. Another example is you may not need a procurement management plan if you don't have large purchases. Tailoring the project management plan for hybrid projects leading hybrid projects requires you to tailor the project management plan even more than for a waterfall project. Below are some examples of how you might need to tailor components of your project management plan. The scope management plan may have information on which deliverables will use predictive methods for scope development and which will use more evolutionary methods. The schedule management plan may indicate that certain deliverables will be scheduled using a Gantt chart and others with a task board. The schedule management plan will also describe how the task board work will be integrated and shown on the overall project schedule. The staffing plan may address different roles and responsibilities for the team, such as the Scrum Master, Project Manager, Sponsor, and Product Owner. There are different certifications for roles in Agile projects than there are for waterfall projects, so any certification or training requirements would be documented in the staffing plan. The communications plan generally documents various types of meetings used to communicate status. The types of meetings used on adaptive projects are different than those in a predictive project. Therefore, the expectations for which types of meetings, the frequency, and who is expected to attend would be documented in a communications plan. The change management plan may identify which deliverables need to go through a change management process and which are considered evolving. These are just a few examples of how you might tailor a project management plan to meet the needs of a hybrid project. Project life cycles. Project life cycle, a series of phases a project goes through from inception to completion. A project life cycle is a series of phases that a project goes through from inception to completion. Project phases are specific to the type of work being done. For example, in Chapter 1, we showed a sample life cycle for a construction project as shown in Figure 5.1. In this sample life cycle for an R&D project, if the team is using an adaptive development approach, the plan, develop, and test phases would likely be happening iteratively and at the same time. In a waterfall approach, the phases would happen sequentially or possibly overlap. Therefore, the nature of the product influences the development approach and the development approach influences the life cycle. Project phases represent the type of work being done. I think it is useful to have a brief description of the work that will be done in each phase and the criteria for advancing from one phase to another. Table 5.2 shows an example of the life cycle I used for writing this book. In addition to listing the phases, it describes the type of work performed in each phase and the criteria for advancing to the next phase. Proposal. Define the concept. Identify the approach. Fill out book proposal. Market research. Contract. Market research is favorable for the proposed concept. A contract is signed by both parties. ISBN number is acquired. Write, develop detailed outline. Draft each chapter. Develop graphics. Create glossary. Proofread. Submit. The manuscript and all graphics are submitted to the publisher in compliance with editorial guidelines. All contractual milestones are met. Edit content is reviewed for grammar and clarity. Graphics are reviewed for clarity. Author review. Technical and project editors approve content. Art department approves graphics. Author has reviewed all edits and approved final content. Layout publisher converts all content for print. Pagination is set. Graphics are converted to print-ready format. Cover design is finalized. All content is in print-ready format. Print pages are produced and reviewed for accuracy. Pages are typeset. Proofs are created. Plates go to press. Sheets are printed. Sheets go to bindery. Pages pass QA. Proofs pass QA. Pages are printed correctly. The book is bound and ready for market. Market book added to catalogs and online resources. Sales and marketing promote book. Book is stocked in online and brick and mortar stores. Project is complete. Book moves into operational management. You can see by reviewing the table above that the phase descriptions are brief. They provide just enough information to indicate the activities happening in each phase and what needs to happen to move into the next phase. In many projects, there may be overlapping phases. For example, there may be some overlap in the edit and layout phases and in the print and market phases. In that case, you may have phase completion criteria rather than advancement criteria. A hybrid project that has different development approaches may have a life cycle with phases that run in parallel. There could be a startup phase for the overall project and then multiple phases where development takes place depending on the type of work. For example, you might see phases for requirements develop test for a software deliverable running in tandem with phases for engineering build-finish work for a construction deliverable. This type of life cycle adds a level of complexity because of the need to coordinate different types of work and deliverables across the project. Key reviews projects often have reviews at key points in the project. They may occur at the start or end of a phase or when a critical deliverable is complete. The purpose of a review is for relevant stakeholders to review the work, ask questions, see a demonstration, if possible, and ensure that certain criteria, such as advancement criteria or acceptance criteria, have been met. Examples of key reviews include an integrated baseline review, preliminary design review, and engineering peer review. The descriptions below provide a general idea of what to expect with key reviews. Integrated baseline review, IBR and IBR, is used to confirm that the project is planned well. The review assesses at least the following. A robust risk assessment has been conducted and risks have been addressed. The scope, cost, and schedule baselines are in alignment. There are appropriate control systems in place. The project management plan is complete and sufficient to move forward. Preliminary design review, PDR. A PDR confirms that the project can move forward with detailed planning. This review assesses at least the following. The preliminary design meets all the requirements. The project is able to meet the cost and schedule baselines. Technical risks are acceptable and have adequate responses in place. All interfaces have been identified. Verification methods have been identified. Technical peer review. A technical peer review is not attended by management. Rather, it is an opportunity for peers to review the work. It is generally used in engineering projects. These reviews are often held in the development phase of a project and may be used to review product components or completed products. As with everything, reviews depend on the nature of the deliverables and the project. Small projects may have a single review before transitioning to operations. Large projects may have as many as 7 to 10 reviews that are multi-day affairs with clients, contractors, and subcontractors. Phase gate. A review at the end of a phase to determine if the project is ready to advance to the next phase. A review at the end of a phase is often called a phase gate. A phase gate is used to determine if a project is ready to advance to the next phase. Usually this means that the completion criteria for a phase have been met. Sometimes a project will advance, even if there are 1 or 2 items that are still in progress or need to be revised. In rare occasions, a project will be terminated at a phase gate because the need for the project no longer exists, because it is clear the project can't meet the objectives or other reasons. Project management plan for a hybrid project will use the Dionysus Winery project to demonstrate how to tailor the components in the project management plan to meet the needs of the project. We'll start with documenting the development approach and life cycle, then discuss which subsidiary management plans would be useful, and finish up with key reviews. Development approach. Different deliverables will have different approaches. The construction and renovation will do well with a predictive approach, while the management system can be developed using an adaptive approach. Tony has met with the project team, and they have documented the development approach for each deliverable along with a brief explanation on why the approach will be used. Table 5.3 Development Approaches for Dionysus Winery Project Deliverable Development Approach Comments Boutique Hotel Waterfall. The requirements for the hotel are well understood and are not likely to change. Much of the planning can take place at the start, and the plans can be baselined and followed. Restaurant Waterfall. The requirements for the restaurant are well understood and are not likely to change. Much of the planning can take place at the start, and the plans can be baselined and followed. Tasting Room Waterfall. The requirements for the tasting room are well understood and are not likely to change. Much of the planning can take place at the start, and the plans can be baselined and followed. Renovated Wine Production Facility Waterfall. The requirements for the wine production facility are well understood and are not likely to change. Much of the planning can take place at the start, and the plans can be baselined and followed. Renovated Wine Storage Facility Waterfall. The requirements for the wine storage facility are well understood and are not likely to change. Much of the planning can take place at the start, and the plans can be baselined and followed. Winery Management System Agile. The management system can start with a list of prioritized features and requirements. Different aspects of the management system can be developed by different teams at the same time. The teams can use the same time boxes and demonstrate working software at regular intervals. As the stakeholders see how the system is evolving, they can make modifications, change the priority, and add new features. There is the option to release increments of the software while continuing to add functionality. Hired and trained staff. Iterative hiring and training staff can use an iterative approach because each of the main functions, winery, hotel, restaurant, etc., will have their own requirements and their own timing for hiring and training. However, the deliverable won't be considered complete until all functions are staffed and trained. There may be opportunities to learn and adapt hiring and training processes along the way. Wine Club Incremental. The Wine Club can use an incremental approach by starting with a minimal set of benefits for members and adding and adapting benefits based on feedback from members. Grand Opening Event Waterfall. The grand opening will need to be planned up front because some of the activities, such as entertainment, will need to be booked in advance. The requirements can be defined at the start, and while there may be minor adjustments, there shouldn't be significant changes. Additionally, the grand opening event has a hard end date. It is not expected to evolve. Life cycle. Due to the hybrid nature of the project and the different development approaches, the project will have a startup and then 3 main branches, each with applicable phases for the type of the work that will be done. Tony has developed a table 5.4, for Tessa that identifies the phase name, work, and completion criteria for each phase. Table 5, for life cycle phases for Dionysus Winery phase, work completion criteria, startup, conduct market research. Concept of operations. Charter. Form the team. Kickoff. Market research is favorable for the proposed concept. A charter is signed by the sponsor and PM. The team members are identified. A kickoff meeting is held. Key reviews. Tessa and Tony met to determine at which points in time Tessa and other members of the management team should review project progress and sign off for advancement. They decided that 4 reviews would be sufficient. Integrated Baseline Review, IBR. The IBR will be used to ensure all the plans are complete, integrated, and incorporate sufficient risk responses. This will take place once the general contractor and key subcontractors are on board. The review will include construction scope, schedule, and cost baselines along with an integrated risk register. When the IBR is complete, the project will advance into the architecture and engineering phase. Construction Readiness Review, CRR. The CRR will give senior management an opportunity to review and approve all blueprints, along with any updates to schedule and cost estimates. Once the CRR is complete, the construction of the hotel, restaurant, and tasting room can begin, along with the renovations to the wine production and wine storage facilities. System Readiness Review. SRR. The SRR will be used before taking the inventory, vineyard, wine club, and winery management system live. Because an agile development approach will be used, stakeholders will see the features as they are developed. The SRR will allow stakeholders to see the entire system integrated and operating in a test environment. Operational Readiness Review. Or the ORR will include a walkthrough of each venue, a dinner at the restaurant with wine, of course, and a presentation by the managers of each function, hotel, restaurant, winery, facilities, HR, etc. This review will take place 2 weeks before the grand opening. This will assure management that all the systems are in place to welcome guests and transition the project to operations. The project management plan defines the life cycle that shows the general flow of work. It also identifies key reviews. The charter often has key milestones and lists deliverables. However, to get a high-level view of all the summary information, you turn to a roadmap. In addition to the phases, reviews, milestones, and other key information, it often includes key deliverables, phase gates, and a timeline as well. Summary. In this chapter, we identified progressive elaboration and rolling wave planning as key tenets of planning. We described competing demands and how to balance the various project constraints. We identified elements in the project management plan and described the need to tailor or customize subsidiary plans to meet the needs of the project. We described how the project deliverables influence the development approach, which in turn influences the life cycle phases. Then we covered project reviews. The elements of the project management plan were demonstrated with the Dionysus Winery project. A project roadmap was introduced as a way of allowing key stakeholders to get an overview of the project work and major events. A roadmap for the Dionysus Winery was shown to demonstrate the usefulness of a roadmap. Defining scope in hybrid projects. There are many ways to plan and define scope in hybrid projects. You can provide very detailed information with a scope management plan, work breakdown structure dictionary, and requirement software, or you can use a lightweight method by working with user stories and a backlog. Given that scope drives all other aspects of the project, it is important to think about how best to identify, refine, plan, and manage scope for your project. In this chapter, we will start by looking at predictive methods to define scope. These methods work well with deliverables that can be defined up front and will have minimal changes. Then we will look at ways to document and prioritize scope for deliverables with evolving scope. Throughout this chapter, we will demonstrate the concepts and methods using the Dionysus Winery project. Planning for scope. With a scope management plan in Chapter 5, we identified a scope management plan as a subsidiary plan of the project management plan. Here we will look at the scope management plan in more detail. Scope management plan, a subsidiary plan of the project management plan that describes how scope will be defined, documented, managed, and verified. In a hybrid project, you will have some deliverables that will use predictive development approaches and some that will evolve the scope as the project progresses. You can use the scope management plan to document how you plan to work with both types of scope definition and refinement. For example, you may want to have a section in your scope management plan for predictive scope and a section for adaptive scope. The section on predictive scope may document how you will decompose scope from the charter, organize the scope, control changes to scope, and verify that the scope is correct. The section on adaptive scope may identify how you will prioritize and validate scope. A scope management plan may also document how scope management and requirements management will integrate. If significant deliverables are being developed by contractors, the plan may discuss means for integrating procured scope and scope that is developed in-house. Below you can see an example of a scope management plan for the Dionysus Winery project. Scope management plan predictive scope decompose those elements that are predictive in nature, such as the hotel, restaurant, tasting room, wine production facility, wine storage facility, and the grand opening. Will be further decomposed using a scope statement. The scope statement will provide a narrative description of each deliverable, identify components associated with each of the deliverables, and identify out of scope work exclusions. Organize a work breakdown structure will be used to organize the scope and further decompose the scope into low-level deliverables. Progressive elaboration will be used to further decompose the work as more information becomes available. A WBS dictionary will be used only for the grand opening. The general contractor will manage the detailed information for all the construction and renovation work. Control changes. A change control board, CCB, will be established to ensure that scope remains tightly controlled. Members of the Change Control Board include Anthony Dakota, Tessa Berry, and the general contractor. If needed, additional people will be brought in to help the CCB understand the nature and implications of proposed changes. Any suggested changes will require a change request, justification, and estimate of the impact on the competing demands of scope, quality, schedule, cost, resources, and risk. A change log will be kept that documents the information from all change requests and how they were addressed. The Change Control Board will meet every 2 weeks to review change requests. Their decision will be documented in the change log and then communicated to relevant stakeholders. Verification and validation verification, technical correctness, and validation, customer acceptance, will be conducted throughout the project. For construction work, verification and validation will consist of sign-off on requirements, documentation, sign-off on blueprints, walkthrough when all trade work is complete, walkthrough when all finish work is complete, review of all building permits, review of occupancy permits, successful reviews, integrated baseline review, construction review, and operational readiness review. Adaptive scope. The adaptive scope is composed of hiring and training, establishing the wine club, and developing the winery management system. Decompose. The hiring and training along with the wine club will be decomposed using a separate scope statement for each deliverable. The scope statement will provide a narrative description and a description of associated deliverables and will identify out-of-scope work exclusions. Organize. A resource breakdown structure will be used to organize the staffing, and a training plan will be used to organize and structure the training. The winery management system and wine club will be organized and prioritized using a separate backlog for each. Control changes based on adaptive principles. Changes can be introduced. However, the due dates are inflexible. Schedule delivery is paramount. Therefore, any modifications to scope must not interfere with timely completion. Verification and validation. Hiring and training will be verified and validated by corporate HR based on an audit of the hiring and training process. The wine club will be validated by Tessa Berry. The winery management system will be verified and validated with regular demonstrations of functionality. These demonstrations will take place at a regular cadence and will be attended by Anthony Dakota, Tessa Berry, the operations manager, to be hired, and the corporate IT director. Final acceptance is the responsibility of the operations manager. Smaller projects may not always use a scope management plan. However, because hybrid projects are by their nature more complex, the plan can be useful to differentiate how scope will be managed for the various aspects of the project. Elaborating scope with a scope statement. A scope statement uses the information from the project charter and progressively elaborates it. The scope statements contains a narrative description of the project, a description of each deliverable, and identifies work that is out of scope. If acceptance criteria aren't identified elsewhere, such as the scope management plan or a verification and validation plan, it is identified in the scope statement. Scope statement, a document that describes project scope and deliverables and identifies out-of-scope work. Narrative description. The narrative description paints a picture of the end result in more detail than the charter. It gives a richer representation of the project overall. For example, the Dionysus Winery vision statement is, for adults who appreciate wine and good times, the Dionysus Winery is a state-of-the-art winery that caters to the fun and frivolity in all of us. Unlike other wineries that only offer wines, clubs, and tasting rooms, the Dionysus Winery will offer education and recreation activities, unique lodging, and innovative, locally sourced gourmet food. The purpose, as documented in the charter, is provide a fun, upscale, unique winery experience for individuals, couples, and groups. The narrative description in the scope statement could be, the Dionysus Winery will be a boutique winery that will provide a fun and engaging experience for patrons. Guests will have the opportunity to learn about grapes, the winemaking process, taste wines in various stages of fermentation and aging, and taste how different foods and wines complement one another. In addition to learning about wine, Dionysus Winery will offer fun events such as balloon rides, music, grape stomps, horseback rides in the vineyards, and other similar events. Our restaurant and tasting room will provide locally sourced food and have the ambience of a Tuscan winery. The grounds will provide romantic venues for weddings, anniversaries, and other special events. You can see how this narrative provides a richer description and deeper understanding of the project. Deliverables. Each deliverable is elaborated to communicate a more complete concept of the deliverable. The process of elaborating each deliverable enables the team to start making decisions, reduce uncertainty, and shape the deliverables. Often the team needs to complete further analysis and research as part of completing the scope statement. This may include creating a decision matrix or breaking the deliverables down via a system engineering perspective, value analysis, product breakdown structure, or other means of identifying the component parts of the project. An example for the Dionysus Winery project demonstrates the process of elaborating the grand opening event. The team was considering 3 options for the grand opening: a Taste of Tuscany buffet, a sit-down dinner with complimentary wine, or a grape stomp. Tessa prioritized her desired outcomes for the event as, the more people the event can accommodate, the better. The event should be memorable, something people don't normally do. The cost should be reasonable. Decision matrix, a tool used to evaluate multiple options against a set of criteria. The team used a decision matrix to determine the best option. A decision matrix evaluates multiple options by creating a matrix with a set of criteria important to the decision. The matrix lists the options in the left column and the criteria across the top row. The criteria may be weighted to indicate priorities. The options are scored against each criterion, and the weights are multiplied by the scores to determine the optimal outcome. Using the criteria Tessa identified and the 3 options, the team created a decision matrix. They weighted the importance of the criteria based on Tessa's preference. The option that best fulfilled the criterion would be rated as a 5, the one that next best fulfilled it would be rated as a 3, and the one that least fulfilled the criteria would be rated as a 1. Table 6.1 shows the decision analysis. Based on this analysis, it was obvious that the theme of the grand opening event should be a grape stomp. A deliverable description for the grand opening could be documented as, the grand opening event will provide a fun and memorable grape stomping event. People will compete in teams of 2 with one person stomping and another catching the juice in a bottle. Each heat will have 12 teams. When all the teams have competed, the winner from each of the heats will have a stomp-off. The grand winner will get a free wine club membership for a year. The grand opening will showcase all Dionysus wines at multiple tasting stations and have big wheels of cheese and mounds of crackers to go with the wines. A band will play before and after the stomp event. Snyder, Denisio, Cynthia. Hybrid Project Management, John Wiley & Sons, Incorporated, 2022. ProQuest eBook Central, http://ebookscentral.pirocase.com/lib/herzing-ebooks/detail.action?doc.id = 7126646. Created from Herzing eBooks on July 22, 2025, 23:49 and 26 seconds. Copyright 2022. John Wiley & Sons, Incorporated. All rights reserved. Ebook pages 67 to 79 printed page 7 of 23 out of scope when elaborating and documenting scope for a project. It is just as important to identify those areas that are out of scope as it is to identify those areas that are in scope. By specifically identifying out-of-scope work up front, you can manage stakeholder expectations and address any concerns about in and out of scope before creating a baseline. At the planning meeting, the team identified the following areas as out of scope for the Dionysus Winery project. Any work and costs associated with fixing up and managing the vineyard, all maintenance and operations after the grand opening, negotiating salaries, staff labor costs are not included in the budget. Organizing scope with a work breakdown structure. The scope statement can help the team elaborate the project scope and each deliverable. However, you need a way to help organize the scope. A work breakdown structure, WBS, can help organize and define the total scope of the project, both product work to create deliverables and project work to organize and manage the project. Work breakdown structure, WBS, a tool used to decompose and organize project and product scope. When you start the WBS, it looks like an org chart. It starts at a high level and progresses downward as deliverables are broken down into finer levels of detail. In addition to organizing the work, the WBS also enables the team to identify all the deliverables necessary to meet the project objectives. In other words, the WBS contains all the work in the project. If the work isn't represented in the WBS, it is out of scope. Figure 6.1 shows a high-level WBS for the Dionysus Winery project. Snyder, Denicio, Cynthia. Hybrid Project Management, John Wiley & Sons, Incorporated, 2022. ProQuest eBook Central, http://ebookscentral.pirocase.com/lib/herzing-ebooks/detail.action?doc.id = 7126646. Created from Herzing eBooks on July 22, 2025, 23:49 and 26 seconds. Copyright 2022. John Wiley & Sons, Incorporated. All rights reserved. Ebook pages 67 to 79 printed page 8 of 23 tip. When working with a WBS, the terms breaking down, decomposing, or deconstructing deliverables all mean the same thing. WBS levels. There are some nomenclature concepts you need to know about a WBS. Each level has a number. The project is level 1, in this case Dionysus Winery. The top-level organization is level 2, project management, construction, grounds, winery management system, and operational readiness. Each lower level of decomposition follows from there, level 3, level 4, and so forth. The WBS in Figure 6.1 follows a best practice of organizing the work by deliverable. Notice that other than project management, WBS elements are deliverables, nouns. Grouping by deliverable also means that the WBS is arranged by logic, not sequence. The work will be further decomposed into activities and put in sequence when it is scheduled. Some projects use level 2 to organize by life cycle phase rather than deliverable. Projects that have multiple locations may arrange the work by geography. While arranging the WBS by major deliverables is a best practice, it is not the only way, as with everything in project management, so tailor your approach to meet the needs of your project. The WBS will be progressively elaborated just like most project artifacts. As the project progresses, it makes sense to provide more detail. At some point working with a chart like the one in Figure 6, one gets unwieldy. Usually when the project gets beyond level 3 or level 4, it is documented in outline format. The portion of the WBS from Figure 6, one is shown below in an outline format. Since the construction scope is very predictable, that work can be decomposed to a low level at the start of the project. However, the winery management system is evolutionary. Therefore, it only makes sense to decompose it to level 3 with the key functions we know about: the inventory module, the vineyard module, and the winery module. The wine club is using an incremental approach. Therefore, that branch of the work will be decomposed as the team gets feedback on what the stakeholders want. Work packages, planning packages, and control accounts for smaller projects that only require 3 to 4 levels. The information presented about the WBS thus far is sufficient. However, for a large project like the winery, you will also want to have some terminology to describe the level of detail. There are 3 levels of detail in a WBS: a work package, a planning package, and a control account. A work package is the lowest level deliverable in a WBS. It cannot be decomposed any further without listing the activities, verbs, associated with the work. A WBS is not used to represent the activities, only the deliverables. The WBS in Figure 6, one is not decomposed to show the work packages. If we were to decompose the roof into work packages, it might look like this. Planning package, a component in the WBS that represents work that hasn't been decomposed into work packages. A planning package is for work that hasn't been decomposed into work packages. This can be due to not having enough information to decompose the work into work packages, employing rolling wave planning, or an approved change request that hasn't yet been decomposed. The WBS in Figure 6, one shows mostly planning packages that have not yet been fully decomposed. A control account is used for control and reporting purposes. A control account is held at a high level on the WBS. It encompasses the planning packages and work packages beneath it. Each control account has multiple work packages, and each work package only belongs to one control account. A control account is used to measure cost and schedule performance. When reporting to senior management, they usually don't want to hear about every single work package, especially if there are no performance issues. Therefore, you roll up the performance information in a way that makes sense for the project. Control account, a component of the WBS used to control work performance and report on cost and schedule status. For the winery project, it might make sense to report performance for the grounds, for the operational readiness, and the renovation. Each of these would be control accounts, and the performance for all the work underneath them would be combined for reporting purposes. For the new construction, Tessa and Anthony will have to determine what level of detail she wants. If Tessa wants high-level information, then reporting on the new construction is fine. If she wants more detail, then it might make sense to restructure that branch of the WBS so it is organized the way progress will be reported. Steps to create a WBS. To create a WBS, follow these 5 steps. Analyze the scope statement and requirements to understand the project work. Determine how you will structure the WBS by major deliverable, phase, etc. 4. 5. Decompose the work until you have work packages or until you can't realistically. Decompose it further. Identify control accounts, if using control accounts for reporting purposes. Establish a numeric coding structure, especially if your WBS has more than 50 work packages. Getting into the detail with a WBS dictionary. The WBS dictionary is used on larger projects to provide greater detail for components in the WBS. The WBS dictionary includes a definition of the scope or statement of work defined. Deliverables, a list of associated activities, and a list of milestones. Other information may include start and end dates, resources required, an estimate of cost, contractual information, quality requirements, and technical references to facilitate performance of the work. Figure 6.2 shows an example of a WBS dictionary template. WBS Dictionary, a document that provides a definition of work, activities, milestones, resources, costs, and other information for components of a WBS. If you don't need as much detail as the example shown in Figure 6.2, you can tailor the form to meet your needs. You won't need a WBS dictionary for all projects, but a WBS dictionary is helpful as a communication tool for large projects to make sure that all the work details associated with a deliverable are fully understood. Working with requirements. Part of understanding and documenting scope is working with requirements. All hybrid projects have requirements, even if they are called stakeholder needs, performance criteria, or some other name. Requirements management is a discipline unto itself, so we won't go into significant detail here, but we will discuss requirements in general. Requirement. A capability that must be present or a condition that must be met to achieve the project objectives. Elicitation. The first aspect of requirements management is eliciting requirements. Eliciting requirements includes more than just asking stakeholders what their requirements are. There are several techniques you can use to elicit requirements. I have grouped them into 3 main categories: working with stakeholders, research, and visual methods. Elicitation, a structured approach to draw out requirements. Working with stakeholders. A good first step to identify and come to an agreement about requirements is to work with project stakeholders. This can include end users, the customer, support staff, team members, vendors, and anyone else who can help you identify requirements. Some of the common methods of working with stakeholders are described below. Interviews. Interviews include asking people how they will use the end product, problems they currently have that the product will solve, and features and functions they want to see, and those they don't want to see. One of the powerful aspects of interviews is that you can ask open-ended questions. By listening, probing, and asking for clarification, you can learn a lot about what people want and need. Focus groups. Focus groups are similar to interviews, but they are conducted by a trained facilitator. The facilitator works with a group of stakeholders. The facilitator may present scenarios, ask open or close-ended questions, and leverage group discussions to find out about obvious and not so obvious needs. Brainstorming. Brainstorming can be very productive when performed with stakeholders from different functions. For example, at the Dionysus Winery, the operations staff, financial manager, vineyard manager, and wine production staff will all have different needs. Rather than talking with them individually, it can be very productive to have them all in the same room brainstorming what they need. Surveys and questionnaires. Surveys and questionnaires are a good way to collect data from many different stakeholders quickly. Many questionnaires provide multiple choice questions that can be quickly tabulated to quantify results. Prototypes. Prototypes provide a functional or non-functional model of a product or service. They allow stakeholders to see how a system or product will operate. Prototypes can be as simple as a visual model that is used to gather feedback and recommendations. For example, you might have a model of the winery grounds that shows where the vineyards, production facility, storage, restaurant, hotel, and parking are located. This can help people visualize the end result, ask questions, and make suggestions. Research methods can include reviewing academic papers, market research, benchmarking, document analysis, and observation. Academic papers and market research are self-explanatory. Benchmarking, document analysis, and observation are described below. Benchmarking. Benchmarking includes identifying the best in class or best in industry examples and using those as a target to achieve or surpass. It can include identifying effective processes and best practices. Document analysis. Reviewing documents can uncover requirements that stakeholders may not think of. Document analysis can include reviewing error logs, complaint files, warranty work, schedules, budgets, and so forth. Observation. Sometimes the best way to understand requirements is to see how people interact with a similar product. You can observe workflows, user interactions, and the environment. This allows you to see how people engage with a system or deliverable rather than how they say they engage with it. For the winery, you can observe how visitors to other wineries behave, where they spend their time, what they're excited about, and what they avoid. Visual methods. The two main visual methods are mind mapping and affinity diagrams. Mind mapping. A mind map is a visual representation of brainstorming. The central idea is written in the center, and then different categories of requirements branch out from the center. See Figure 6.3. Each branch may have offshoots with requirements or ideas. The mind map organizes the requirements and thoughts as they are identified. You can use a paper mind map with sticky notes or an electronic mind map to capture ideas. You can see a mind map for the winery management system in Figure 6.3. Affinity diagrams. An affinity diagram uses a technique called affinity grouping to categorize ideas based on similarities. See Figure 6.4. It is similar to a mind map, but is set up as a table or breakdown structure. Figure 6 shows an affinity diagram for the winery management system. Affinity grouping, categorizing elements into groups based on similar characteristics. Prioritization. Once requirements are identified, they should be prioritized. One way to prioritize is by function, such as inventory requirements are most important, followed by production, security, and so forth. Another option is by schedule. For example, the vineyard operations will be active first, followed by production, storage, inventory, and then administration. You can also have stakeholders participate in the prioritization by using a nominal group technique. To use the nominal group technique for requirements prioritization, follow these steps. Brainstorm requirements. Discuss the requirements so everyone has a common understanding. Have every person rate each requirement. Here are 3 different examples you can use for rating. Each person numbers the requirements from most important to least important. Each person has a set number of points, such as 100, that they allocate based on their opinion of the relative importance of each requirement. Each person assigns a number from 1 to 5 based on their priority. 1 is not important, and 5 is critically important. Tally the results. A simplified version of nominal group technique is dot voting. With dot voting, each person has a set number of dots. They allocate their dots to the requirements they think are most important. When all the dots are placed, they are tallied. Documenting requirements. There are several ways you can document requirements. Large projects with hundreds or even thousands of requirements use software to record and manage requirements. However, you can also use low-tech means, such as index cards or user stories. Cards. A card is a reference to when requirements were recorded on index cards and cataloged. Today, we generally use electronic cards due to the increasing remote work and distributed teams. Cards collect basic information about the requirements and record the information in a consistent fashion. Figure 6.5 shows an example of requirement card. Requirement hashtag, category, description, originator, priority acceptance criteria, comments. Figure 6.5 requirement card. User stories. A user story describes what a stakeholder wants something to do and the benefit it provides. They are commonly phrased as a underscore 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 underscore. I want underscore 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 underscore. So I can underscore 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 underscore. Underscore 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 dot. User story. a brief description of a desired outcome, documented from a stakeholder's perspective. This method keeps the stakeholders' needs visible throughout the development process. For the winery, you might see the following user stories. As the winery production manager, I want to track equipment maintenance needs so I can schedule and maintain the equipment efficiently. As the operations manager, I want to track the wine inventory by brand so I can ensure we have sufficient inventory to meet demand. As a wine club member, I want to know the history of each bottle of wine so I can increase my knowledge of wine. Prioritizing scope with a backlog, a list of work to be done. The WBS and WBS dictionary are used with predictive projects. For projects using an agile methodology with evolving scope, a prioritized backlog is used. Figure 6.6 shows part of a backlog for the winery management system. Summary: in this chapter, we described how a scope management plan can define how scope will be defined, documented, and managed. For projects with predictive scope, we discussed using a scope statement to elaborate information from the project charter and a WBS to organize the scope. For large projects, we described using a WBS dictionary as a structure to record deliverable details. Scope and requirements go hand in hand. We described ways to elicit, prioritize, and document requirements. We concluded by looking at how a backlog can be used to evolve adaptive scope and prioritize stakeholder needs. Building a predictive schedule: one of the most common questions we are asked as project managers is, when will it be done? Sometimes it seems like that question is the adult version of your kids asking, are we there yet? In all seriousness, your project schedule is the most comprehensive view of project progress. It contains all kinds of information from milestones to resources to start and end dates and more. Knowing how to develop, optimize, and maintain your schedule is a fundamental requirement for project success. In this chapter, we'll discuss how you can use a schedule management plan to help plan how you manage the predictive and adaptive aspects of your schedule. Then we will describe 4 steps for building a schedule with well-defined scope. Organizing with a schedule management plan: a project where some deliverables can be well-defined with reasonably accurate duration estimates can be scheduled with a fair degree of confidence and accuracy. The same can be said for projects where some of the deliverables can't be defined or agreed to until partway through the project. The schedule approaches for these 2 situations are very different. But on a hybrid project, you still have to put together a schedule that accounts for both situations. This is where a schedule management plan can help you think through the best way to develop and maintain a project schedule. Schedule management plan: a subsidiary plan of the project management plan that describes how the schedule will be developed, managed, and maintained. Like all project artifacts, a schedule management plan should be tailored to meet your needs. Table 7.1 describes information commonly found in a schedule management plan. Schedule methodology: document the scheduling methodology that will be used for the project, including critical path, agile, or other methodology. Scheduling tool: identify the scheduling tools that will be used for the project, scheduling software, task boards, and so forth. Level of accuracy: describe the level of accuracy needed for estimates. If there are guidelines for rolling wave planning and the level of refinement that will be used for duration and effort estimates, then you will indicate the levels of accuracy desired as time progresses. Units of measure indicate whether duration estimates will be in days, weeks, months, story points, or some other unit of measure. Variance thresholds indicate acceptable variances for work to be considered on time, in jeopardy, or late. Schedule updates: document the process for updating the schedule, including update frequency and version control. Indicate the guidelines for maintaining baseline integrity and for rebaselining if necessary. For the Dionysus Winery project, the schedule management plan will include information about how the deliverables, which use multiple development approaches and different scheduling methods, will be incorporated into one schedule. There are several scheduling terms in the Dionysus Winery Schedule Management Plan that have not been defined or used thus far. Those terms are defined below. Integrated master schedule. A schedule that combines all schedules for a project into one all-encompassing document. Critical path. The series of tasks through a project with the longest duration, which determines the soonest the project can be completed. Critical path methodology. A scheduling approach that identifies the path that drives project duration and identifies the amount of scheduling flexibility on other paths. Summary task. A task that aggregates information from detailed work into a single task. Release. A set of features, functions, or deliverables that are placed into use. Release plan. A plan that shows the expected timing, milestones, and outcomes for releases. Iteration. A brief, set time interval in a project where the team performs work. Also known as a time box. Story points. A relative unit of measure used to estimate work in a user story. The schedule management plan for the Dionysus Winery project is shown below. Many projects don't need a schedule management plan. But because hybrid projects have different methods of scheduling and may use different schedule tools, it is a good idea to think through how to integrate that information. Having an integrated master schedule promotes efficient schedule planning, manages stakeholder expectations, and allows you to determine overall project status. Schedule methodologies and tools. Because there are different development approaches that will be used in this project, we will use an integrated master schedule, IMS, that can accommodate both critical path and iterations. Those elements that are predictive in nature, the hotel, restaurant, tasting room, wine production facility, wine storage facility, and the grand opening, will use critical path methodology, CPM. Hiring and training will initially be documented as a summary task. It will use an iterative approach where each function will use the same set of activities. The duration and start and end dates will be defined and refined by the responsible functional manager. The initial set of benefits for the wine club will be established as part of the project. Because the benefits are not yet defined, the wine club will be documented as a summary task that will be elaborated as information becomes available. The winery management system will be developed using Agile methodology. A release plan will be developed using a series of 2-week iterations. The first release will be a minimum viable product. Thereafter, the product owner, operations manager, will prioritize additional features and functions. The integrated master schedule will show the 2-week iterations. The detail will be managed using a task board. Level of accuracy and units of measure work that uses CPM will be planned out in full. Work occurring within a 60-day window will be refined to show duration in days. Work occurring from 60 days to the end of the project will be estimated in weeks. Iterative and incremental work will use weeks as a unit of measure. Agile work will use fixed duration time boxes. Variance thresholds. Variances of greater than 1 week on the critical path or near critical paths are considered late. Variances on non-critical paths that use more than 50% of their float are considered in jeopardy. Schedule updates. The integrated master schedule will be updated with progress on a weekly basis. Schedule status will be reported to the sponsor monthly. Predictive scheduling. Developing a schedule for those parts of the project that have clear and fixed scope involves 6 steps: identify tasks, sequence tasks, assign team members, estimate durations, analyze the schedule, and finalize the schedule. The next several sections cover the steps 1 through 4 in more detail. Steps 5 and 6 are in the next chapter. Identify tasks. Tasks are the actions needed to create the work packages. When you create your WBS, you decompose the work to create work packages. For creating the schedule, you decompose work packages to create tasks. In other words, tasks are verbs. Your WBS should be composed of nouns, and your task list should be composed of verbs. Task, a distinct element of scheduled work, also known as an activity. Figure 6.1 in Chapter 6 shows a high-level WBS. The task list below elaborates the work package for the foundation. You can see that the numbering scheme developed for the WBS in the list format is continued for the tasks. 1.2.1.3, Foundation 1.2.1.3.1. Excavate 1.2.1.3.2. Grade 1.2.1.3.3. Install footings 1.2.1.3.4. Place forms 1.2.1.3.5. Install rebar 1.2.1.3.6. Pour concrete 1.2.1.3.7. Remove forms for short projects you may not need to use rolling wave planning. However, for projects longer than 6 months, identifying all the tasks that need to take place usually isn't feasible. Therefore, identify only those tasks you need to accomplish in a 60, 90-day range and keep the future work at a higher level. Tip: the words activity and task are interchangeable. Most scheduling software uses the term task. A guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK guide, uses the term activity. It is a good practice to ask your team members to identify the tasks needed to complete the work packages. They have the subject matter expertise necessary to identify all the work needed. If you are able to start with a schedule from a similar project, you will still need to ask your team members to help you tailor it to meet the needs of your project. Sequence tasks. Once you have identified your tasks, you will need to put them in order. Most work on a project occurs sequentially. One task ends, and then the next one starts. However, there are some situations where tasks start at or around the same time or finish at or around the same time. The three main relationships between tasks are finish to start, the preceding task finishes, and then the next task starts. The tasks in Figure 7.1 all have a finish to start relationship. A finish to start relationship is abbreviated as FS. This is the most common relationship. Start to start. This relationship occurs when one task starts and then the next task starts. In this situation, the preceding task only needs to start before the next task starts. It doesn't have to finish before the next task starts. For the grand opening event for the winery, the task of planning the menu will start before planning the wine list. The menu doesn't have to be fully planned out before the wine list is created, but it should at least be started. A start-to-start relationship is abbreviated as SS, finish to finish. The preceding task must finish before the next task can finish. For example, if the operations manager is putting together an operations manual, he can write the first draft of the content and then give it to a professional editor who will edit and format the content. For this series of tasks, some of the work can occur concurrently. However, the editing can't finish until the writing is finished. The formatting can't finish until the editing is finished. This type of finish-to-finish relationship is abbreviated as FF, finish to start, a relationship where the preceding task finishes before the next task can start. Start to start, a relationship where the preceding task starts before the next task can start. Finish to finish, a relationship where the preceding task finishes before the next task can finish. Tip: there is a start to finish SF relationship, but these are rare. An example would be a new system must be running before the previous system can finish shutting down. This type of relationship is best left to professional schedulers. It is a useful practice to use sticky notes to work out the initial sequence of tasks. That way, if you make a mistake, find a better way, or forget a task, it is easy to rearrange the sticky notes. Leads and lags. Sometimes you don't want to start a task as soon as its predecessor finishes. Sometimes you want to wait. In scheduling terminology, this is called a lag. For example, using the tasks for the foundation work package after you pour the concrete, task 1.2.1.3.6, you will have a lag of 10 days before you remove the forms, task 1.2.1.6.7. A lag is indicated with a plus sign, plus symbol. Thus, the relationship between these two tasks is shown as FS plus 10D, where D indicates days. Lag, a delay between tasks. Lead, an acceleration between tasks. If you want to accelerate the time between two tasks, you use a lead. For example, if you have an FS relationship between gathering requirements and designing, you could apply a lead to accelerate the design. This is represented as FS-2W, where FS is the finish to start relationship. The lead is shown as a minus sign, and 2W signifies 2 weeks. Creating a network diagram is a visual depiction of your schedule from beginning to end. It shows the tasks as boxes, also called nodes, linked by arrows. Once you are comfortable with the flow, or the diagram starts to get too big, you can switch from sticky notes to entering the information into scheduling software. Figure 7.2 shows the same information from Figure 7.1, but it is entered into software, and it shows the 10-day lag. Network diagram, a visual depiction of the schedule using nodes and arrows. Figure 7.2 network diagram in software. Assign team members. You can have a perfect network diagram that shows the flow of work, but nothing happens without team members. At the start of the project, you will think about the roles and skills you need. As you progress, you will substitute names of team members for the roles. Entering the team member roles or names into scheduling software is referred to as resource loading. Resource loading, entering resources into a scheduling tool. For large projects with 50 or more team members, you will need to spend some time thinking about the number of team members you will need for each role. In the next few sections, you will learn about several easy tools you can use to help keep track of your team needs. Resource breakdown structure. A resource breakdown structure can show the number of people you need in each role. The resource breakdown structure in Figure 7.3 shows an example for the renovation projects for the Dionysus Winery. This breakdown chart is like an org chart or a work breakdown structure, but it focuses on project resources. If you have a lot of physical resources, such as equipment, material, and supplies, you can either integrate those categories or do a separate breakdown structure for physical resources. Resource histograms. You can also show resource needs with a resource histogram. Figure 7.4 shows a resource histogram with the same information as the resource breakdown structure in Figure 7.3. Resource histogram, a bar chart that shows information about resources, such as number or skills. You can create a resource histogram by creating a table like Table 7.3 in a spreadsheet. Then you simply highlight the data and then insert a column chart. Another great use of a resource histogram is to show the number of resources you will need by skill level, by month, or in each location. Figure 7.5 shows a resource histogram with resource needs by month. This resource histogram shows a stacked bar chart rather than a column chart. There is no single correct way to chart your resource needs. Use whichever method works best for you. Role descriptions. Many of the misunderstandings that occur on projects are a result of not having a clear understanding of the roles, competencies, responsibilities, and authority associated with each role. Having a document that clearly identifies this information can help minimize these types of misunderstandings. For example, you might record information like this. Role: the position on the team. It describes the type of work that needs to be done, such as writer, programmer, or electrician. A role usually coincides with a job title. Competency describes the skill or skill level of an individual. A junior plumber has the competencies to lay pipe and connect pipe following a set of blueprints. A senior plumber can design the plumbing to comply with standards and regulations. Responsibility: the work the person in a role is expected to perform. The person with the role of an editor is responsible for reviewing all written content, ensuring that it conforms to the editorial guidelines and is easy to understand. Authority: the right to make and approve decisions. The person in the role of the contract administrator is usually the only person with the authority to enter into or change a contract. Role: a position on a team that describes the type of work the person does. Competency: the skill level of an individual. Responsibility: the work a person in a role is expected to perform. Authority: the right to make and approve decisions. Responsibility Assignment Matrix. A Responsibility Assignment Matrix, RAM, is a matrix chart that shows the type of participation for each role or team member and each work package. Like the role descriptions, this chart provides clarity around expectations for each team member and reduces the likelihood of misunderstandings. Responsibility Assignment Matrix, RAM, a chart that shows the role team members have on a work package. A common version of a responsibility assignment matrix is called a RACI chart because it documents who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. RACI chart, a type of responsibility assignment matrix that identifies who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. The responsible person is the person doing the actual work. This may or may not be the same as the accountable person. The accountable person is the one answerable for a deliverable. Someone who is consulted may be a person who has done this type of work before, a stakeholder with an interest in the outcome, the customer, or even a consultant. The person who is informed needs to know the status of the deliverable. They may have a dependent deliverable, or it may be the project manager or another interested stakeholder. With a RACI chart, it is important to note that each deliverable must have one and only one accountable person, since there should only be one person who is answerable for the status and success of a deliverable. A RACI chart is a very common version of a RAM, but it is certainly not the only one. It can be useful to include an S for sign-off as well. If a sign-off function was being used in the RAM above, the project manager might sign off on the requirements the production manager submitted and the drawings the architect submitted. You may not have the luxury of choosing your team members. If you do have input into selecting team members, there are several variables to consider. Even if you don't get to choose who is on your team, keep these variables in mind so you can optimize team performance. Skill level and experience. A team member with a lot of experience and a high degree of skill will be able to complete the work in less time, with less rework, and with a higher degree of quality than someone with less experience. However, they often have a higher hourly pay rate. Availability. Team members who can dedicate themselves to working on the project full-time will be more productive than those who can only work on it part-time. The more projects a person is working on at the same time, the less productive they are on any one project. Cost. A project that uses in-house resources may not have to worry about the cost of team members, but if you are using contractors, you will want to consider the hourly or daily rate of team members. Attitude. Attitude can affect your project in a few ways. For example, a team member who really wants to work on the project may be a better fit for the team than someone with more experience who isn't excited about your project. Another aspect of attitude has to do with a person's general outlook. A person with a positive outlook is often a better team member than someone who is overly critical, combative, or negative. Flexible skill set. In Chapter 3, we talked about team members who are generalizing specialists, also known as T-shaped people. Team members with a deep understanding of a specific skill and a broad understanding of many complementary skills can be a valuable asset to the team. They can support other team members if they fall behind and present ideas from a holistic perspective rather than from a narrow focus. Geography. If you have a project that requires the team to meet in person, geography can be a significant factor in assigning team members. However, if you have a partially or fully virtual team, you may be able to find team members with great skills and better rates than local talent. Keep in mind when establishing a virtual team, spending extra time on communications is critical. You want people to feel connected even though they don't get to see each other. In addition, when you can't read someone's body language, you miss some good communication cues, so establish as many communication channels as necessary to reduce the opportunities for misunderstandings is important. Estimate durations. Estimating the duration for the project, deliverables, or tasks takes place throughout the project. It is not a one-time event. Techniques for estimating duration and effort are described in Chapter 10, Estimating. In this section, we will differentiate between duration and effort and describe some of the variables that influence duration. As you find out more information about the project, your estimates will become progressively more detailed and more accurate. At the beginning of the project, you only have high-level estimates, such as milestones in the project charter. Once you start building your schedule, you can get a reasonably good idea of the durations for deliverables. Then, using progressive elaboration techniques, you can start to refine estimates even more by calculating not only the duration, but the effort involved as well. Duration, the amount of time needed to complete work. Effort, the amount of labor needed to complete work. To understand the difference between effort and duration, assume you have a 40-hour workweek and a task that requires 80 hours of effort. If you have 2 team members who are working full-time, you can assume that it will take 5 days or 1 business week to accomplish the work. The calculation would be 80 hours / 2 equals 40 hours of duration. If you have only one resource working at 50%, it will take 20 days or 1 business month to get the work done. 80 hours / 0.5 equals 160 hours of duration. As noted in the previous section on selecting team members, variables such as skill set, experience, and availability can affect the effort required and the duration of tasks. If you want to get really accurate, factor in the assumption that for every 40 hours spent at work, people are productive only about 34 hours. The rest of the time they are answering emails, participating in staff meetings, or engaged in other non-project work. Tip: only spend as much time as necessary refining your estimates. If you don't need to track hourly or daily costs, calculating the effort hours is often not necessary. At this point, you will have an initial version of the schedule. However, your schedule is not ready for distribution yet. You will need to analyze it and likely find ways to compress it before you can baseline and share the schedule. We'll cover those topics in the next chapter. Summary: this chapter covers information on how to build a predictive schedule. The schedule management plan describes the scheduling methodology, tools, and how predictive and adaptive aspects of the schedule will be combined into an integrated master schedule. We also looked at 4 steps used to build a predictive schedule: identify tasks, sequence tasks, assign team members, and estimate durations. You start by decomposing work packages into tasks and then sequencing those tasks to create a network diagram. Once team members are assigned, they can help estimate task durations